So what we want to do is cultivate a capacity for kindness. So, close your eyes. Take a few moments to breathe in and breathe out. So what we want to do is cultivate a capacity for kindness. So, close your eyes. Take a few moments to breathe in and breathe out.
Alrighty. Let's get started, chat. Hold on a second. Turn that off. What happens if we just turn that off? Is that better? No. Everything's so green. Oh my God. Chat. Welcome, everyone. No, that was not me on the flute. So welcome to another Healthy Gamer GG stream. My name is Alok Kanoja. Just a reminder, everything we discuss on stream today is intended to be for educational purposes only, and nothing is intended to be taken as medical advice. So if y'all have a medical concern or question, please go see a licensed professional. That was not me on the flute, actually. So shout out to our music, our stream music creators. So these are people within our community that have put together music for us, which, as y'all point out, is a banger. So Bruno Giroldi, Duck Duck Goose, Snuggle Bear, Skyle, and Rorik are awesome people that have put together our stream music. So that's the cool thing about HG is like we've got a lot of cool and talented people out there, and they like get together and they like make stuff. And so if y'all are interested in that kind of stuff, I think there's stuff that kind of happens somewhat organically on Discord. Sometimes we'll have more official events and things like that where, like, I know that there's a group of music creators and stuff, artistes, if you will, who are artistic. And yeah, so we've got all kinds of cool stuff that goes on at various times. We've had coding workshops in the past. Since it's Mental Health May, which is Mental Health Awareness Month, we're focused this month on like getting our stuff together. And so people are talking a lot about, not talking, but we've got programs to get your sleep schedule on track, programs to clean your room, which apparently is going really well and a lot of people are really benefiting from because they're finally like cleaning things together. Bot hosted study lobbies are also going on. So check that stuff out. So like, you know, I think just from a general perspective, like you can learn stuff on the internet, right? Like you can listen to me talk about whatever and, you know, watch educational videos and watch motivational videos and stuff like that. We try to do a little bit of that ourselves. But at the end of the day, like you got to do stuff at some point, right? And that's where like doing stuff takes some structure sometimes. So it's hard to just like get up and do things. But if you have some kind of structure that can support you in doing things, like, okay, like let me just log on to Discord and then do this like room cleaning stuff. And we're all going to get together and we're going to like clean our room for 45 minutes. We'll hang out on Discord. Like, I don't know exactly how it works, but, and then at the end of it, like you've done something, right? It's so much of what holds us back, especially if you're stuck like I was at one point. It's like you just have so many days that are like completely zero. Like nothing gets advanced in any way, shape, or form. And the problem is that if you're living in this life of like completely 0 days, you feel like anything that you do is never going to be enough, right? Because the mountain of work that you have is so high that everything feels insignificant. But that's kind of the problem, is that like if everything that you do feels insignificant and isn't going to chip away at your pile of work, your iceberg, then it just perpetuates. And so what you have to do is get started somehow, however you can, and recognize that it may feel insignificant. And that's actually okay. Like it's okay for it to feel insignificant. But recognize that just because you don't it doesn't feel significant doesn't mean that it isn't significant. And so you got to start somewhere. And whether you want to climb, you know, a 10,000 foot mountain, 20,000 foot mountain, or take 10 steps, the first step you take is always the same. Like you just have to take steps. And so what I really love about the Discord and the community is that like, that's where we help people take steps, right? We also do that through coaching and stuff in a more personalized or group way. But it just depends on where people are. Like you know, if coaching works for you, that's fantastic. If you want to try something out and kind of learn about yourself, check out something like group coaching. But if you're not ready for any of that stuff, or you don't feel like it's necessary, or you want to do something like see a therapist, like that's all totally fine too. And then there's Discord, we have Twitch chat, you know, we hanging out. You know, that's just what we do. So there's informational stuff, educational stuff, entertaining stuff. Kind of if y'all want to put your, you know, toes in the water, without jumping all in into transforming your life. Oh my God, I need to transform my life. Sign up now and transform your life. One day we're going to do something like that, I'm sure. Yeah. Yagi810 is saying LMAO describing me right now. Yeah, that's what we try to do. We try to... Twitch guy 2 is saying exclamation point OnlyFans. I don't think that that's a command, buddy. Rinaldi is saying, I just got diagnosed with ADHD, and it's only because of you that I went and got tested. Thank you for helping me. You're most welcome, but it's not only because of me. So remember that I may have had something to do with it, but then you actually had to go make the appointment, show up at the appointment, get diagnosed, right? So it's not only me. Like, you're a huge part of that. And that's important. Don't miss out on that. You know? Like, give yourself a pat on the back for taking the first step of, like, taking control of your life. And I'm happy to have helped. Yeah, the process can be tough. I have not seen Eternally Confused and Desperate for Love, but I think we may do more like show analysis at some point. 1 minute of silence for the missing plant. This plant is just moving to a place where it'll be healthier. I swear, it's doing okay. I have not heard the new Kendrick Lamar album. Eastiscus? I don't know how to pronounce your name. That's what parents say when pets die. I could probably go fetch it if it's really important. Relationship red flags, Miss Jaxelin. We are going to talk a little bit about that. Actually, that's great. So Miss Jaxelin's wondering relationship red flags. I don't know what that's in reference to, but I don't know if you're having a conversation with someone in chat, but that's actually a great segue. So today is Friday the 13th, and so it was funny because I was browsing Le subreddit, and what I kind of discovered was that there's actually like a really interesting post that we can cover that's somewhat related to Friday the 13th. And so if y'all want to, we can actually just dive right into that. So we can take a quick look, okay? So, introverted and being seen as creepy. So I went on this date with this girl a couple months ago, and we went out to eat, and being introverted, I'm not a real big talker. After the date, she texted me and said she thought I was creepy because I didn't talk much. Yes, that is literally what she said, and didn't want to go on any more dates. Why do introverts get mislabeled as creepy just for not talking a lot? In honesty, it kind of bothered me. Any thoughts? So, one of the most challenging pieces of feedback to get, and we don't even think about it as feedback, is being called creepy, right? Because here's the thing. Like, if let's say you like this person, you go on a date, and then they tell you like, oh, like, you're creepy, I don't think I want to go out anymore. Like, what do you do about that? Right? How is that actionable in any way, shape, or form? And not only is it like, how do you just like be less creepy? You can't really do that. And so not only is it like not actionable, it's really confusing as to why some people get labeled as creepy. Is it because we're introverted? Like, what does it mean to be creepy? Like, how do you even get labeled creepy? Like, what are the features of creepiness? And this is why it's so challenging, is because like people will use this word a lot, right? Oftentimes in dating and relationships. But it's the kind of thing that is devastating. It's like a devastating label to receive and absolutely nothing you can do about it. Because even if you were to go and ask this person, I'm not sure that this person would want to have a long conversation with you about it after one date. But even if you did have someone who let's say would sit down and talk with you about what creepy is, like, what would they even say? If you ask someone, if you feel like someone else is creepy, like, what would they say? Like, how, if you ask them, okay, what is it that makes me creepy? It's going to be very hard for people to even tell you what it is. And so I thought, in honor of Friday the 13th, what we would do today is actually talk a little bit about what it means to be creepy. And the interesting thing is that thankfully we have a very sophisticated language in psychiatry about different kinds of non-verbal sort of cues and other things that I think we can actually unpack what creepiness is. And the cool thing is, as we unpack what creepiness actually is, then what we can do is also figure out some way to actually address each of those components. Okay? So the first thing to understand about being creepy is that it's kind of like just a feeling that you get, right? So like someone, if you think about the times when you've been creeped out, even if we were to ask you, okay, what is it that makes this creepy? You may not really be able to say. So maybe there are some things that you may be able to say because your mind is going to come up with answers, but we don't really know that those are the features of creepiness. So what we're going to first do is understand, okay, like what are the features of creepiness? And if we can kind of break down what are the features of creepiness, then we'll get an avenue if you've been told that you're creepy before, or you have a friend who's creepy and like doesn't really, is having trouble socializing, then, you know, like maybe you can give them some feedback that's a little bit more constructive. Like we can help ourselves and potentially help other people. The other cool thing about it is that even if there are people that we feel are creepy, maybe we can give them some more formative feedback to try to make the world a better place. And so the first thing that we're going to do is dive into like, okay, what does it mean to be creepy? Okay. So what I want to point out to begin with is just that creepiness is kind of it's a gut check, right? So we have in our minds or brains, okay, I guess this is clipped off in the top. So maybe my face involves creepiness, which we'll get to for a second. We have in our minds or our brains all this kind of like signal processing stuff that is going on. And we're not really aware of what the signal processing is. But there are certainly things that we know, like people who make movies, for example, we know that there are certain things that we can do to give the audience a sense that this person is creepy. And so I think the Joker is a really good example of this, because if you watch this movie, like it's kind of creepy, right? The dude is creepy, but what aspects of it are creepy? Because some people, like as we saw in our subreddit post, they sort of say, like, I'm an introvert, therefore I'm creepy. No, it's not like that. Introversion, if you really look at the original definition that Carl Jung, I believe, came up with, it's not about being quiet or shy. That's not what introversion necessarily is. It's about whether you get drained or energized by interacting with other people. So after a long day of work, this is the way that I kind of think about introverts. Like if you're exhausted at 6 p.m. on a Friday and it's been a rough week, how do you spend the next 4 or 5 hours? Like relaxing, unwinding, or having a good time? Do you go out and socialize, or do you sit at home and kind of like spend time with yourself? So when you're like regenerating your mana bar, do you spend it with people or without people? And that's a good example. I think that's the best kind of description of introversion versus extroversion. And a lot of this other stuff like shyness or like, you know, not being able to relate to people and other stuff, that's all completely different. Okay. So now if we look at the Joker, the question sort of becomes, okay, what are the features that are involved that make this creepy? And so the cool thing is that we've done research on this kind of thing. And what people have discovered is there's this thing called the uncanny valley. So if something like looks human-esque, but doesn't look human enough, we kind of consider it creepy, right? So this is where the brain sort of decides that, okay, like this is not a human, therefore I'm not going to judge it in kind of a, I don't need to judge it at all. Like it's not human. There's nothing I need to be afraid of. Oh, okay. Let me move my camera actually. Hold on. Move it over here. Okay. So I will just be part of, I'll be part of the slides. So Dr. K can be part of the uncanny valley. All right. So if we kind of look at this, actually, you know what would be better? It's probably if we just did this. How about we do this? Okay, easier. So if we look at this concept of the uncanny valley, what we see is that there's this sort of like, there's this ratio between familiarity and similarity. And there's kind of this interesting place where we're like not too worried about things if they don't look human. And then if they look superhuman, we're not really worried about them either, or like just a regular human. But then there's this sort of like lack of humanness that our brain assigns a creepiness value to. And the interesting thing is if you tunnel down into what are the features of the uncanny valley, what do we see in these things that like make us feel kind of disturbed, they're actually discrete features that will move us from here to here and trigger this sort of idea that things are creepy. So if you look at this, like what about this picture makes it creepy? What about this makes it creepy? Right? What do y'all think? Right? It's disturbing. And so then there's also other things that as we kind of look into creepiness and stuff like that, what we'll kind of see is like, this is just kind of frightening, but there's certain features that get kind of changed a little bit. And like, that's what makes it creepy. But the key thing here is that there are certain features here which actually like make it creepy. So let's kind of tunnel down into what is it that makes all of these things creepy, okay? So the first aspect of creepiness is, okay, so we're going to talk about a couple of different, before we dive in. So let's just kind of recap what we've done so far. So sometimes you'll see something, right? I'll be walking down the street and I'll see something and then I'll think that is creepy. So let's say I'm walking down the street and you see like someone who's homeless. And this is where like homeless people oftentimes evoke a creepiness or fear response from people walking down the street. And the question is like, why is that, right? So even when I was in training, one of the key things that one of my mentors or teachers once taught me is they were trying to tell me like, okay, if you're trying to figure out if someone is depressed or someone is psychotic, there's a very simple, what they called a limbic test. So that's kind of like trusting your brain instincts about whether this person is depressed or whether they're psychotic. And the test is, if this person were sitting on the subway and there was one seat open on the subway and the seat was right next to this person, would you sit down next to them or not? And if you would sit down next to them, they're depressed. If you wouldn't sit down next to them, they're psychotic. And it's kind of like, it's not precisely true. It's not, a true scientifically validated test. But it's a really interesting perspective because there are some things that our brain is interpreting about other people. There's certain features which our brain is keeping track of, which make us like hesitate with some people and make us not hesitate with other people. So the other interesting thing is that we can lean on a couple of different areas of research. So one is attachment theory and some of those things in terms of child development. And then we can also look at research in schizophrenia, because oftentimes, if we're talking about psychotic disorders and oftentimes what makes people who are homeless like difficult, like frightens people kind of instinctually, there may be all kinds of different biases and things like that, which I'm not saying that those don't exist and this is entirely explanatory for it, but there's like something about some kinds of people that set us off. And the interesting thing is that we know through neuroscience analysis of people with schizophrenia what some of that stuff is. Because oftentimes when people are actively psychotic, they creep other people out, right? And like you'll look at someone, you'll be like, that person is on something, that person is high, and you kind of like steer clear, you cross the street. So these are experiences that we all have. And the cool thing is we can do research to sort of understand what's going on, okay? So the first thing to understand about creepiness is what we call fixed affect. So fixed affect is the display of emotion on your face. So when we think about it, like fluctuating affect in a normal kind of way, like a certain amount of fluctuation in your facial expressions calms other people down. Okay. So like, I'll give you guys a simple example. We're going to do it real quick, right? So if I go like this, right, this is great. Now, like, think about how do you feel if I'm doing something like that, right? If I just start smiling, I'm like, hey, how's everybody doing today? There's something about that could be comforting, or maybe you're smiling too. You're like, what is this guy doing, right? And then if I stop fluctuating it, I'm still smiling, right? And the second that my affect changes, now my affect has changed. And so all it takes is fluctuation of affect. So as long as my facial expression is changing, and this is where even if you look at if I don't know if y'all have had experience with kids, but the most terrifying thing for a child is when you have a neutral facial expression that they can't get you to react. So if you go to a child, don't do this to children, but just to illustrate it. Like go to a child and you have a completely neutral affect. Like it's not even about smiling. It's about the fact that the affect doesn't fluctuate, right? So I can just do this. And that's creepy. It's freaking creepy, right? You'll see that. So there's not a fluctuation of affect. And then if you do that with a kid, what the kid will do is they'll like try to get you to respond. So first they'll make a noise. They'll like start laughing. They may like touch your face. They'll do something cute. They'll like show you something. They're like going to try to get some kind of reaction. And then like if that doesn't work, they're going to start crying, like anything to get you to react. And so sometimes part of what we'll get to like why this is a problem for people, but the first thing to understand about creepiness, and we can even look at things like, we can go back to our kind of Joker, taking a quick look at the Joker. Okay. And what we find is that like this has a certain amount of like, if y'all have seen the Joker, you know that he kind of like laughs inappropriately, right? So like he just smiles for way too long. And that's partially potentially why clowns are creepy. But what we see is a non-fluctuating affect leads to people feeling creepy. Okay? Next thing to talk about. Oh noes. My notes went away. Okay. So we talked about kind of fixed affect. The other thing that we can sort of touch on for a second is flattened affect. So we know that this happens in people with schizophrenia where their affect gets blunted. So the range of affect, so if I go from this to this to this, right, there's a wide range, whereas you can have kind of flattened or constricted affect. You'll see this sometimes in late stage Parkinson's as well, whereas like they just don't smile much. They don't get very sad. So there's like a flattening of the affect. So instead of going like this, what I can do is I'll just do this. Right? And one has a wider range and is like more comfortable. Like it makes people like if you laugh kind of fully, right? Like a full, like a hearty laugh is something that makes people feel comfortable. Whereas like if you just kind of like slyly smile all the time, that constriction of affect where you don't display a whole lot of positive emotion and you don't display a whole lot of negative emotion, it's not just the fixedness of it, it's the fact that there isn't the range. So both of those things will lead to a sense of creepiness. Okay? So the next thing that's really, really important is the lack of mirroring. And this is what especially causes kids to freak out, is that generally speaking, when we like interact with another human being, we want to like mirror the affect. And you can sort of feel this yourself, right? So you're ready, like, I'm going to go like this. And as long as I have enough fluctuation and changes and like, you know, as long as there's movement and fluctuatingness, it's going to cause you to respond. But like, think about what you do when I go like this, right? What are you doing? You're smiling. And you can't even help it. Like you're at home, you're like watching, you're like, what is this guy doing? I don't even know. It's not even funny, but what the hell is happening? I don't know. It doesn't matter. But the point is your brain is responding. You can feel yourself respond. And so that emotional mirroring is what comforts people. Because if we were sitting across from each other and I went like this and you started laughing too, then like we know we're kind of on the same page, right? And this is where like emotional mirroring is very, very important for helping people feel comfortable. It's very important for people feeling understood. So emotional mirroring is a huge component of it. And what I oftentimes find in people who get labeled as creepy is that they're not very good at emotional mirroring. And we'll get to why that is in a second. So like this is where like, you know, if someone else is feeling sad and you're not like able to display sadness, then like that's going to cause some problems. And they're like, okay, this person just isn't on the same wavelength with me. And so if we think about these vague terms like, okay, this person is just not on the same wavelength, like what exactly does that mean? It has to do with things like emotional mirroring. And if you're really on the not the same wavelength at all, if that gets really, really bad, then you end up being perceived as creepy. Because here I am crying about something, and this person is like, you know, like that's kind of weird. It's kind of creepy. It like doesn't make me feel comfortable. So the next component that we're going to talk about which is kind of related to that, is discongruent affect. So this is another thing that makes people feel creepy, which is that there's a certain display of emotion which is appropriate, and there are other displays of emotion that are not appropriate. So if, for example, you'll see this in the Joker as well, where like he has this tic where he starts laughing, right? So, and it like creeps people out because you shouldn't be laughing in a situation like this. And so when you display discongruent affect to what you're talking about, we'll also see this as a defense mechanism where sometimes, we'll be talking about really, really sad and terrible things and we'll like start laughing, or people will crack a joke or like something will happen and there's like a discongruent affect. The other thing that sometimes that we'll see is that if I'm talking about, yeah, I just won the lottery and I'm the happiest person alive. I love life so much. I love people. I'm so happy. I have everything in the world to be thankful for. And I want you to join me in this bliss. Get in my van and I'll drive you to a place that has endless happiness. Get in my van and we'll go to a place. I can't do it with a straight face. But you guys see how terrifying that is? It's like, I don't even need to mention the van. You know the van is coming. It's coming, right? Something is weird here. Like alarm bells. So this is what I want y'all to tune into. If you want to understand creepiness, why the hell is that so damn creepy? If you're watching that and you're like, oh, right? And even now, if I do this, that's going to make you feel more comfortable because that's emotionally mirroring what you were feeling, which is like, get away from me. I don't want to get in your van. I don't want to go to your world of bliss or whatever is like, So that's where like emotional, this discongruent affect is very important. So if you're talking about things that are a lot of fun and you don't display a lot of emotion, or you're talking about things that are terrible and you're laughing, right? Like I'm not going to do that because that will even bother me. I mean, I'm sure theoretically I could, but like, you could talk about something really, really terrible happening and you could be like smiling while you're talking about it. And then when you combine it all, that's how you get your traditional crazy villain from a movie. So if you go back and you watch movies where there are villains that are very, very creepy, I'm thinking about like movies like, No Country for Old Men and like some of these other, there are a couple actors that are really good at this. And if you like really look at what they do, why they're so damn creepy is because they'll have discongruent affect. They'll do brutal things to other people without, like displaying any kind of emotion. And that sets us, it like comes across as creepy. And so then like this is where if we think about creepiness, it's all about the display of the emotion. And if we think about what's going on a neurological level, someone else's brain is factoring in all these things. And it's so fast, right? I can just like go neutral. And like it happens instantly. It's like, what the hell is that? And so when you're thinking about, if someone calls you creepy, it's like the reason they can't tell you what's wrong is because it's that circuit of the brain that's active. Now, I'm not saying that you're behaving the way that I am. I don't think people are, hopefully it's not that bad because I'm really doing gigantic caricatures. But there are features of that are going to become really important, which we'll kind of get into soon. Okay? So there's one more thing that makes people hella creepy, which is responding to internal stimuli. So generally speaking, once again, are the empathic circuits of our brain are kind of like attuned to what's going on. And generally speaking, people respond to like certain signals in the environment, right? So if you're like eating dinner and someone gets up and like gets down on one knee and pulls out a ring and is proposing to someone, everyone in the environment is going to be tuned to that person, right? And then like everyone's kind of like tuning in to this external stimulus and we're all sort of responding together. So when we sort of all respond, like when we have this kind of like crowd mentality of responding together, we're like, that's very like emotionally comforting. Even if you think about things like peer pressure, right? Let's all get out our pitchforks. We all rile each other up. And then like, we're all on the same, like we're, stamping our pitchforks and we're like, down with whatever. Like, so whatever is happening, we're all kind of doing it together. And we have this kind of mob mentality. So if you think about it, the mob mentality, whether it's good or bad or whatever, it's just how human beings work. So when you are not in the same wavelength as other people, when you're not responding to external stimuli and you're instead responding to internal stimuli, that's very creepy. So in the case of something like a psychotic disorder or, substances of abuse where people are like hallucinating and stuff, that creeps people out. Why does it creep people out? Because this person is like responding to stimuli that you can't see. So self-dialoguing is a really good example of something that creeps people out. So if someone has auditory hallucinations and I'm talking to my hallucinations, it creeps people out. We call that self-dialoguing, where it's like, I'm not even talking, like I'm talking to y'all, and there's no one in the room with me. But this is not creepy, right? Because I'm talking to you. Like there's this, it's weird. There's like no other human here, but this somehow is not creepy. Even though I'm talking, like I'm literally talking in an empty room. And I keep talking in an empty room. But I'm talking to you, and you know that I'm talking to you. So it kind of feels normal. Whereas if I was, if I was like at a food court, and y'all were sitting at a table nearby, and I was just doing this with no camera or anything like that, if I was just talking, sitting at a picnic table, then people would be like, what the hell is wrong with this guy? Y'all get that? So Iskamog is like, there's no camera. We aren't real. Oh my God. You guys are real. Copium, Blanese. Oh my God. I'm wrecking myself. But y'all get what I'm saying? Like, seriously, like, I know the memes and stuff aside. Okay, hilarious. No one's real. This is all in Dr. K's head. But you get it? Like, so there's this thing of responding to internal stimuli where, like, when you're talking, in the worst scenarios, this is auditory hallucinations and self-dialoguing, which is when you're talking to yourself, and it creeps people out. So now the question is, like, okay, so these are the features of creepiness, right? There's a certain amount, and basically what it comes down to is this weird kind of empathic stuff about facial expressions, the fluctuating ability of facial expressions, the the congruence of facial expressions with what's going on around you, like kind of like being on the same wavelength as someone else, emotionally mirroring other people, which when parents don't do that with their kids get messed up in all kinds of different ways. That's all fixable. Don't worry about it if you wound up in that situation. So don't give up hope. But we sort of know that like the lack of mirroring, like, fixed affects, like the lack of fluctuation, all this stuff comes across as creepy. Last thing is responding to internal stimuli. There's one other thing that we will talk about towards the end, but should we talk about it now? Okay, we'll talk about it at the end. Remind me, okay? So this is why it's so hard to deal with, because first of all, we don't really know what we're doing, right? You're not really paying attention to like, okay, how much am I fluctuating my face in a 30-second period? Is my face fluctuating a lot, or is it fluctuating a little? And even then, like you guys may have noticed, like this is a little bit creepy. It's not as fun as when I was doing it earlier. And why is that? It's because there's a certain range of affect, and since I'm exaggerating a bit too much, it like feels a little bit creepy, right? And even when I do this, maybe you feel a little bit more comfortable because like now I'm mirroring what you're feeling, okay? So this is what's going on. It's all this subconscious stuff. And this is what's so frustrating about is you don't know what you're doing. Like, am I smiling too much? Am I smiling for too long? Am I smiling when I shouldn't be smiling? These are all the different features of affect which make other people feel creeped out if we don't do it kind of properly, okay? And so then the question is, okay, what do we do about it? So the first thing to understand is that if you try too hard, all of this stuff is going to happen. So that's where people will say, if you're going on a date, just relax, right? Like, don't worry about it. Get out of your head. And why is that really important? Like, sure, that's good to do, but let's understand, what does that have to do with creepiness? If I'm in my own head and I'm over analyzing, okay, like, how often should I change the fluctuation of my smile? Should I go 20% smile? Should I go 30% smile? Should I go 40% smile? I've been at 40% smile for way too long. Let me go back down to 20%. If that's literally what's going on in your head, how empathically connected do you think you are to the other person? Like, not at all, right? And so this is what we tend to find in people who get called creepy, is a lot of them will have problems like social anxiety. And what does that literally mean? How does that work? What that means is that when you sit with someone, you're not actually attending to them. You're in your own head and you're thinking through a bunch of things. They're telling a funny story, and then you're like busy like thinking about what you just said and like how you don't want to stumble over your words. And so you're not paying attention to the story. And then they kind of like look at you because they just got to the punchline of the story and you're supposed to laugh, and then you didn't realize it. And then like some part of your brain is like, oh, there's the punchline, laugh. And then you're like, ha 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 ha, that's so funny. And then the other person is like, the fuck was that, right? And so then you become like, if you're socially anxious, instead of interacting with someone, you become like an alien or a reptile in a human's body, trying to interact with them the right way. And you get so caught up in your head that you start forcing, okay, this is when I'm supposed to smile. Like I'm supposed to smile when I first meet someone. So you meet someone at the very beginning, you're like, smile. Execute smile.exe. Hello. I'm so happy to be here right now. It's nice to meet you. And then the other person's like, what the? Right? And they think you're a little bit creepy. So in terms of responding to internal stimuli, I don't think most of us are psychotic. But even if we come across as creepy, the reason for that is because we're literally stuck in our own head. And so the facial expressions that we're displaying are going to be based on this, right? So even if like you're on a date and the other person is having a good time, if you think you screwed up and you should have ordered something else, or you should have let them order first, or you interrupted them, and then you're in your own head, suddenly you're responding to internal stimuli, and they're like enjoying the atmosphere, and some live music just came on, something like that, and they're like, so they turn to it, but you're thinking about what you just said, and you're like, and then you're not attending to the external world. You're responding to internal stimuli. It comes across as creepy, right? So the second thing about affect. So this is where oftentimes people who are creepy will get stuck in some kind of negative affect. Or they'll try too hard and get stuck in like some kind of positive affect, where you're trying too hard to have a good time. And even when I say the phrase trying too hard, it's like, what is that? How do you define that? But y'all kind of know, right? Like you know when someone is trying too hard. And what does that mean, trying too hard? How do you know when someone's trying too hard? It's because they tend to exaggerate affect that becomes kind of non-genuine, and they'll like amplify it artificially. So you're not feeling it internally. So what you do is like you ramp everything up, but then it's not congruent. It doesn't mirror what the other person is feeling. Oh my God, that's so hilarious. Oh my God, that's the funniest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. And you are the funniest person ever. And I'm having such a good time at this date. And I would love to do it again. Right? So there's like, that's a little bit creepy. Like not quite as bad maybe. But y'all see that? It's sort of like this amplified affect. And why do you amplify affect? Because you yourself don't feel comfortable. So then we have this kind of phrase of like, fake it till you make it, which I think is a terrible idea. Okay? So if you are struggling with being creepy, recognize that a lot of this stuff is actually changeable. Like you can act on it, okay? There are things that you can do. So here are a couple of tips. So remember, the goal here is to be relaxed. The goal here is to have a fluid and mirroring affect that is, generally speaking, full range, right? So we want it to be fluid, fluctuating, right? So sometimes we're gonna have fun, and sometimes we're gonna be like, oh my God, so serious. Oh, so serious. And then it's like, oh wow, that's crazy, right? So we want a range of affect. We want to be able to pace the other person. And range, pace, fluctuating, full range, and mirroring, right? So we want to pace the other person. We want to go high when they go high. We want to go low when they go low. And we want, to be able to move. So we don't want to just stay in one place for a long period of time, okay? So then the question is, okay, like how do I do that? Because if I'm trying too hard, if in my mind it's like the other person is smiling, I should smile. The other person is stop smiling. Terminate smile.exe. Execute smile.exe. Execute smile.exe at 50%. If you go down that route, you're going to be responding to internal stimuli, and you're not going to actually be attending to them. You're going to feel like some kind of reptile in a human's body, and they're going to creep them out. So what do you do? A couple of things. One is think of a positive memory. So if you want to force yourself to smile, and you want it to be an authentic smile, so there are two kinds of smiles. There's this kind of smile, which is creepy, right? Because the smile doesn't reach my eyes, is what people say. And then there's like this kind of smile, which is like a little bit better, right? It's a little bit better. So there's kind of a full face smile. And the way that you do those two things, if I tell myself to smile, what you're actually going to do is you're going to just do this, which is kind of creepy, right? Doesn't touch your eyes. Whereas if I think about like, how much my kids love Pokemon, it's going to make me feel like more emotionally connected, and I'm going to smile more naturally. So one thing you can do is just think of a positive memory. Like, I know it sounds kind of weird. You don't want to do it too long, otherwise you're going to slip into the responding to internal stimuli thing. But as let's say you're about to meet the person, and you kind of like walk up to the restaurant, you see someone waiting outside. And as you're walking up, like just think about like, man, that, it's Overwatch 2's player base has dropped by 99%. God, that's got to suck for the Overwatch devs, right? And you're just thinking about that. And as you walk up, you're going to have some kind of active fluctuation of, and generally speaking, lulls, right? Right. So right. So it's got to be hard for them, but you're like, wow, that's a mess. Like NFTs, lull. Right. So whatever it is, just think about something, and it can be nice and short, and it's going to like create sort of a natural smile on your face because you're thinking about it. And then what's going to happen is you're going to be thinking, right, as you walk up and you see them, and you're going to be like, hey, how are you? And then that's going to change. The affect is going to change. You're going to introduce yourself, smile, right? And that's where, hey, my name is Olive. Nice to meet you. And they're going to see all of that. And even in the 5 seconds of you thinking about something and attending to them, introducing yourself and smiling, there's going to be some leftover like sort of fluidness from your memory, which is going to like, and you've won at that point. In the first 5 seconds, if you've like made a decent introduction, like you've won. On the flip side, for those of you that are paranoid, if I screw up the first 5 seconds, does it mean that I'm screwed for the rest of the date? No, not at all. Right? But that's kind of a key tip, to evoke some kind of internal emotion. Don't dwell in the memory, don't get lost in the memory, but just kind of evoke that emotion, let it sort of relax you a little bit. Think a little bit positively, and then go into the interaction. The next thing that you really need to do is try to be with them, okay? And this may sound, I mean, it's simpler to say than it is to do. But recognize that you're not there. So the people who get caught up in their own head, right? What they're trying to do is they're trying to do well on a date. So there's like a certain outcome, like I want to be liked. And if you're chasing that outcome, you're not going to be enjoying the date. I want to be liked. 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 Then you're not actually like enjoying the other person's company. You're just trying to get them to like you, which, by the way, is creepy. We'll get to that in a second. So this is where what I'd really encourage y'all to do is just recognize that this is an opportunity for you to get to know someone and see if this person is worth liking, right? So like this is another human being that has a whole set of experiences that could be good, bad, interesting. They could recommend books to you that you'll really enjoy. They may play games that you really enjoy. They may recommend movies. They may recommend music. You can learn about the world through this person's experience. And if you go on a date, I try to attend to them, right? It's not just necessarily in being polite and trying to be like the nicest guy on the planet. Like, I'm going to be such a nice guy. Like, I'm going to make sure that they have the best and happiest time ever. That's bad too, because then you're sort of forcing a particular kind of interaction where someone is like, oh yeah, you know, the food isn't, my chicken could use some salt. And then it's like, okay, like, do you want me to get a waiter for you? Like, no, let me get some. And then you're like, I want you to have the best experience possible because you're amazing and you deserve the best. Like, how do you know that? You just met the person. You don't know what they deserve. They may not deserve the best. They may be awful people. And so instead of trying to, you know, shoot for a particular thing or display yourself in a particular way, just genuinely attend to the person, right? This is an opportunity. You have an hour, you have 2 hours to get to know someone, and you get to learn about the world. And the more you have that attitude, instead of chasing a particular outcome, either honoring them with your presence or trying to get them to like you, like all of those things are outcome oriented, and you're not going to kind of enjoy yourself, and you're kind of trying too hard. As you try too hard, all that stuff we talked about affect is going to start to come into play. And then you won't be able to like attend to what they're saying. You're not going to be emotionally mirroring because they're actually okay with the chicken. It's a little bit, could use a little bit of salt. But then when you call the waiter over and you're like, we need new chicken. This is terrible. I don't know how you could serve this stuff. Discongruent affect. Because the person's fine with it. They're like, whatever. I can survive without perfectly salted chicken. And so this is a lot of stuff that people do that they don't realize that they're doing, but it essentially boils down to these things, okay? So the last thing that we're going to talk about, and this is very important for creepiness. So this is one thing that you really have to be careful about. So the other thing that makes people creepy is not respecting boundaries, okay? So you can do all the affect stuff, but then the other thing you need to be really careful about is if you are not respecting people's boundaries, they will think you are creepy, and you should not do that. So good examples of not respecting boundaries are, like repeated hammering text messages, expecting responses in a brief period of time. Like if you feel like, how can I say this? This is difficult, but sometimes people who don't respect boundaries have emotional needs that can only be met by the other person. So that you have to be very, very careful about. If you are in a situation where your emotional needs and comfort depend upon this person, you can come across as creepy. So I'll give you all a couple of examples. So if I felt like I did poorly on the first date and I message you and I'm like, hey, sorry for screwing up on the first date. And they had kind of a good time. They're like, oh no, it was totally fine. But their response doesn't soothe me because I think they're just being nice, right? So I feel like I screwed up. They're just being nice. And then I hammer at them again. Because what I really need from them is for them to tell me, yeah, you did screw up, but it's okay. Like, let's go out again. I'll give you another chance. I'm looking for some kind of emotional like resolution from them. Whereas they're not kind of on the same page, but I'm kind of relying on them for emotional needs. Other examples, so this can also be sort of like what crosses into the clingy territory, right? We go on 2 dates. Why aren't you messaging me back? Like, what's going on there? Like, because you feel lonely. You feel like, so like, look into yourself. Why do you need this person to message you back after 2 dates? Right? And then you get angry and then you start, calling them bitches or assholes or whatever. But like, think about your own emotional needs and how much you are relying on this other person to soothe your emotional needs. And oftentimes people who are creepy don't really think about it that way. They don't think about they're not even aware of like what kind of needs they're pursuing. Does that make sense? Yeah, so loneliness is absolutely, as Rubric Krub says, loneliness is sad and can turn us ugly. Absolutely. And the problem is when it turns you sad and then you depend upon that other person to resolve your sadness. And by resolve, I don't necessarily mean make you feel happy. Sometimes what people are looking for is like essentially abuse, right? They're like, why aren't you texting me back after two dates? Either call me an asshole and just be plain with it, or, give me another chance. Like, don't stop leading me on. So we're looking for some kind of resolution. So be very careful about your own emotional needs and how much responsibility for soothing those things or addressing those things you put on the other person. That's going to lead to boundary problems. And the last thing is explicit boundaries. So like there's a certain, standard of like what you're allowed to do in terms of physical contact, right? So if you're on a first date with someone, like don't, put your arm around them like in the first 5 seconds, like, right? Don't put your arm around their waist. Don't try to hold their hand like right away, right? There's a certain kind of like boundary, which is kind of like evolves over time, and you have to kind of give it that time. So there's also boundaries, which I don't really understand too well about, what's the frequency of text messages and things like that. Calling people drunk is another example. Like, you got to be careful about that sort of thing. There are all kinds of emotional boundaries, physical boundaries, like, I don't even know, like interaction boundaries, for lack of a better term. And if you violate those kinds of boundaries and don't really respect them from another person, like that's going to make you come across as creepy. So those are explicit behaviors that have nothing to do with what's going on over here. It's all about how you treat and behave with another person. So just to kind of summarize, the challenge with being called creepy or telling someone that they're creepy is that we don't really know what that means, right? So people will label you with it. And that's really challenging because like you don't know what you're doing wrong. If someone calls you creepy, like what do you do about that? How do you get uncreepy? Well, the truth of the matter is that you can't actually do something about it. And that's, in order to understand what to do about it, we have to understand what creepiness actually is. And it turns out there's very, very sophisticated and nuanced circuitry within our brains that tells us when something is comfortable and safe and when something is creepy and dangerous. And a lot of that circuitry has to do with things like affect. Affect is the display of emotion. And what we tend to find is that safe affect is affect that is fluctuant, full range, and appropriate and mirroring. So it's like, there's a full range of affect. It changes a lot. It is tuned into what's going on, and it matches what the other person is doing. So as long as you kind of like work on your affect in that way, like you'll come across as less creepy. Oftentimes you'll find things like movies and video games and stuff like that will tap into these features when they try to create someone who's creepy or scary or a villain. And people will say, oh my God, this person is such a good actor. And sure, they're good actors, but what are they actually doing? If you analyze what is it that they're doing that makes them creepy, it's what they do with their affect, right? So this is why you'll sometimes even have like Breaking Bad, I think is a good example of this, where you'll have like protagonists who are villains, but they're likable. And what makes them likable? Like you can have like people who do bad things that are likable. What makes them likable? It's that affective, fluctuation that makes them not creepy. Like you like them, right? And it's kind of interesting if you watch movies and stuff, look for these features, then you'll begin to see, okay, who's creepy and who isn't creepy. Couple of other things to remember about being creepy. First is that responding to internal stimuli tends to freak people out. So this, in the worst case scenarios, we see this with things like psychotic disorders, with auditory hallucinations and self-dialoguing, which means talking to yourself, which is really, really creepy. But unfortunately, if we have anxiety, if we're overthinking things in our head, we're going to get some of that same effect, right? Because I'm all up here and I'm not attending to what's going on around me. I'm not paying attention to the conversation. I'm not emotionally mirroring. And the last thing is boundaries. So you got to respect people's boundaries. So whether those are emotional boundaries, physical boundaries, interaction boundaries, frequency of communication, when you expect people to get back to you. We're not saying that people, the other party isn't at fault in some way here, which we'll talk about as one final point. But generally speaking, there's don't text someone 15 times after a first date within 15 minutes, right? Give them a chance to respond. The last thing to remember, and this is unfortunate, but sometimes people will call you creepy just because they feel uncomfortable. And it may not be that you're doing anything wrong. So some people who have a low discomfort tolerance, right? So people who get triggered easily, for example, or people who don't know how to, communicate effectively. Sometimes people get called creepy and they actually aren't doing anything wrong. And that's just coming from sort of the insecurity or discomfort of the person that you're with. And that has really nothing to do with you. And that's what makes it so difficult to sort of deal with, is because sometimes people are, you're not really doing anything wrong. It's just people will call you creepy. Because I think the other thing that people have learned over time is that creepiness is sort of like an impervious attack. Like if you call someone creepy, they don't get a discourse about that, right? And if they push you about it, what makes me creepy? What makes me creepy? Then that just reinforces the fact that they're creepy. So in a sense, it's almost like a trump card in some relationships, or especially in terminating relationships or setting boundaries, where if you call someone creepy, they don't have any kind of recourse against that. And it's a very, very safe way where you can tell people, oh yeah, why didn't I block that person? Why? He's a creep, or she's a creep. She creeps me out. And as a society, what we've sort of done is we've said, if something creeps you out, you're allowed to just say that, and then nothing else needs to be done. So you have to be a little bit careful about being, if you receive the feedback that you're creepy, I would be very, very critical of yourself and really do a process of understanding, am I in my own head? Am I really attending to the other person? Am I sitting with them? Am I really trying to learn about them and their lives and things like that? Am I sharing a piece of who I am? Because sometimes what will happen is people will just feel creeped out, but that really has nothing to do with you. That has to do with their own samskars, their own, cognitive schemas, their own triggers and things like that, which is you can't really do anything about that, right? So be a little bit careful about that. So that's what creepiness is. Turns out that I think there's a lot of good neuroscientific basis for these kinds of things. This is really wired into our core neurocircuitry. The challenge is that we don't really understand that. So when we get this kind of feedback, we don't really know what to do with it, because no one explains, okay, what is creepiness? How can we understand this? The good news is that through things like film and television and other kinds of research on concepts like the uncanny valley, we can actually break apart what creepiness is. And if you get that kind of feedback, what you can do about it. Make sense? Good. Questions? Yeah, so your turn, my turn is saying if it's many people who are always telling you you're creepy rather than just one person, then that can help. Very good point, right? So how do you know if the creepiness is on your end or if it's the other person's discomfort? That depends on the consistency of the feedback. What if a narcissist doesn't give a F about the fact that they're creepy? So if people don't care that they're creepy or they don't care about your opinion, that's fine. So the interesting thing is that narcissism and creepy, I think, are not necessarily correlated at all. So we tend to toss around the term narcissism a lot, but generally speaking, if you look at people who are narcissistic, they're very emotionally attuned, which is how they get away with what they get away with, right? They're so good at mirroring emotion. They're so good at provoking emotion and manipulating emotion. They're actually very, very adept. I almost think, I mean, it's not really true, but you get narcissists who are absolutely creepy. But sometimes people with narcissism, or especially like cluster B personality disorders, their emotional empathy is like through the roof. Like they're very, very like, their emotional circuitry in some ways is very, very competent. I don't know if that makes sense. So Acid Army Gaming is, how can you tell what other person considers too much texting? There should be like a safe number in a certain amount of time, right? Yeah, I don't really know. What do y'all think? Like what's the acceptable, because I don't, I don't like meet people on dating apps and stuff. So I don't know what the acceptable number is. I don't know what the frequency of texting, yeah, so J.K. Ray is saying, ask them about that. I think that's an excellent point. The one thing that you've got to be kind of careful about is that asking too many things about boundaries and stuff early on can be creepy, right? So if we go on one date and I'm like, okay, tell me what makes you comfortable in terms of frequency of texting and stuff like that. Tell me what makes you comfortable with this, with that. Generally speaking, I'm a big fan of just asking people. Yeah, so McThug Fresh is saying, just got to match their behavior, realize when you're striking out. I think some of it's like kind of organic. Asking him about it, I think, is a very good idea. Just to give y'all a sense of how to do that, right? So in kind of a safe way. If it's been a day or let's say you send a text and they don't respond, I would say kind of like, think about it like tennis, where you send something and then they send something back. Although I wouldn't adhere to that rule too carefully. This is where, the second day or third day, if you text them again, it's really tricky because you don't want to say, am I bothering you by texting you too much? Because that comes across as kind of like insecure and stuff like that. You also want to kind of acknowledge, okay, acceptable number of texts per day after the first date. So people are saying like 1 to 5. I would have put a lot of difference between 1 and 5 even there, but you can text them, like I'd say like once or twice, and then if a couple days go by, I'd say you can text them again, and then like maybe with that second text or with the third time you text them, maybe not the third actual text, but the third time you text them, I would sort of check about their frequency of texting. So texted you a couple times. I don't know if you're busy or whatever. Like that's cool. Just curious. I mean, do you want me to should I try again, or are you just busy, or like what's going on? Cool either way. I know people get busy. I'm like, I'm happy to hit you up next week if things are busy for you right now. And then if you don't get an answer to that, then I would let it go. Right? So you can sort of let people know. So this is where, just to give you all an example. So sometimes I'll have patients who are late to appointments. And generally speaking, when I have appointments, it's like, I have a 10 a.m. appointment, I have 11 a.m. appointment. If 10 a.m. shows up at 10:15, I'm not going to go late into my 11 a.m. appointment who's on time. So if they show up late, we get less time. So if that happens a couple times, I'll talk to them about it. I'll just be like, so help me understand. So I've noticed you've been late 2 or 3 times. What should we do about that? Because, I think we're doing a lot of good work. I'd love to be able to work with you for the full hour. So is this the kind of thing, like, should I just mentally schedule 15, should I assume that you're going to be 15 minutes late to every appointment? Because I can schedule that accordingly. Or, are you going to show up on time, or so sometimes what I would do is have patients who are sort of like late off and on. I'd schedule them at 11 o'clock, and then I'd have lunch from 12 to 1. And I'd sort of mentally account for, okay, the chances are they're going to be 15 minutes late, and then I can run into my lunchtime a little bit and get a little bit of work done at 11. So I can sort of mentally prepare for it, but you just have a conversation about it, right? What should I expect from you? And that's where that's a really good non-judgmental way to do it, right? So you're not saying, I want you to do this. You need to text me back, because if you do that, that's going to be creepy. But asking people, like, what are the expectations here? Like, just tell me what the rules of the game are. I'm not saying that they need to be a particular way. I'm not asking you to change them. I'm just trying to figure out what are the rules of the game. Wrigglechi is saying also try to let them initiate text conversation once in a while. That way you know if they are interested. Yeah. How could someone work on incongruent affect? That's a really good question. Arifon123. So the first thing to understand about incongruent affect is that some of it is like a healthy, normal adaptation. So even if y'all watch the interview with Iron Mouse, I think that's a good example of sort of like incongruent affect, which we see a lot. It's very normal for people to laugh when they're talking about like terrible things happening to them, right? Because it's a defense mechanism. It's humor. So sometimes incongruent affect is just a consequence of a defense mechanism. And so if that's the case, then like you just need to be aware of that, right? And then like sort of ask yourself, why can't I sit with this emotion the way that it is? Like what makes it really uncomfortable for me to, sit with this? So also joking, sometimes with my male patients, we would sometimes talk about, when we have some heavy emotional experience, one of us would crack a joke. And sometimes they would be dick jokes. And so instead of actually making the dick joke, what we learned to do is say like, okay, now feels like one of those moments where, a dick joke would really cut the tension. And then we'd kind of laugh about that. And then we wouldn't need to make the joke anymore because we're acknowledging a little bit. And then we're going to stay in that kind of negative space. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay. Yeah, I guess as to be expected, people did not really. Okay, let's move on. Dr. K, Aria Maki, Dr. K is speechless. Good job, y'all. Yeah, absolutely. I was trying to decide. So this is one of those things where like, sometimes I'll like look at chat and it's like, okay, should I address this or should I not address this? And this is one of those things where it's like, sometimes, like if you're playing a game of chess and you lose a piece, you just got to understand that if you try to keep fighting that battle, you're just going to lose more and more pieces, right? It's like sometimes you just got to take the L and move on because that's not a battle I'm going to win. And then I was debating, okay, like what are the odds of like actually, but I think the truth of the matter is I think y'all know, I think the community is actually, how can I say this? Y'all pretend to be far bigger degenerates than you actually are. It's almost like instinct or reflex at this point. It's not instinct, it's reflex, right? It's conditioning. It's like, oh, Dr. K said dick joke. Must respond with emote. And y'all know what I mean. I think you understood what I was trying to say. And then if y'all want to, that's okay. Like, that's just how it works, okay? So it's fine. Right? That's our dick joke. Y'all get that? It's like when I say something, it's like, that's the way that you manage the tension. If someone makes some great comment, cut the tension like a circumcision, like that's hilarious. Right? But that's just our dynamic. So this is where, when we're talking about mirroring affect and stuff like that, right? So regardless of the context, if Dr. K uses the word dick, like we have to respond in a particular way. And that's our social contract, which is fine. So I was just like working through that in my head a little bit. But do we want to, right? You can't saying can't argue with the contract. You're right. You can't. And even then I tried to go meta with the contract and y'all handled it for a little bit. And then now it's like, nope, back to it. Anyway, it's fine. I think it's part of the relationship, which I love. It Explorers or ITEX Explorers. It Explorers, you ruin everything for me. I apologize. Okay, moving on. All right. Okay, so we've got, give you all a choice. Let me see if I can do, maybe we can do a poll if mods are around. So we've got two options. This is taking longer than I thought. So has Dr. K ever made a vid on passive-aggressive coworkers and managers versus acceptance versus learned helplessness? Which one do y'all want to do next? Thoughts? 2? Wait, I don't know which one's 2 and which one's 1. It seems like people are interested. Oh, whoops. Seems like people are interested in passive-aggressive coworkers. No, acceptance versus learned helplessness. Okay, we can do acceptance versus learned hopelessness. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so acceptance versus learned helplessness. How can one distinguish between the two? No. Yeah, so this is it's a good question. So a lot of people will wonder a little bit about, okay, what's the difference between acceptance and learned helplessness? So let's kind of talk about this for a minute. The first is, what we want to do is, so let's think about this. So some time ago, some psychologists really coined a very interesting concept, which is learned helplessness. And learned helplessness is this idea that over time, you learn to be helpless. So generally speaking, when we face challenges, it is the natural human response to try to overcome that challenge and succeed in some way. So in the face of adversity, we're going to rise up to the challenge and we're going to learn how to beat it. What's happened though is that some people learn over time that there's no way to win. So we'll see this in cases of complex PTSD or CPTSD. We'll see this in a lot of other cases of abuse or trauma or things like that, where you kind of learn that resistance is futile, right? And so oftentimes you'll see this in cases of domineering parents or things like that, where you sort of get divested of your own power and your own agency. And so then when you get faced with a challenge, what happens is instead of trying to rise above the challenge and address the challenge and things like that, what you end up doing is just giving up, right? And so what happens with people with learned helplessness is that they learn to give up very, very easily. And so if something doesn't work right away, you just kind of you just sort of give up. And now recently what's sort of happened is there's been a big push for something called acceptance. So even in psychotherapy, for example, there's a kind of therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, which is sort of rooted originally in cognitive behavioral therapy. And then what they sprinkle in is this Eastern concept of acceptance, which is that you have to accept what's happened in life as opposed to focus on changing it. And it's kind of interesting, right? So the weird thing there is that if we sort of accept what happens in life instead of trying to change it, then don't we sort of end up in the same place as learned helplessness, which is we're just going to let it kind of happen? And so this is a really common question and can be quite confusing, right? So if I accept something, how does that help? Isn't that the same as not doing anything about it? And it's a good question, but in my experience, actually quite the opposite. So the first is that we can look at studies on things like acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. And what we find is that those studies are very, very potent at revealing that sort of this acceptance philosophy can lead to good clinical outcomes. So ACT is oftentimes used in addiction kind of scenarios, and we sort of see this historically as well. So if you look at Alcoholics Anonymous, which is a historically effective organization at helping people overcome addiction, kind of the first rule of Alcoholics Anonymous is, you go up and you say, "Hi, my name is Alok, I'm an alcoholic." And so it's kind of weird because if you're sort of admitting defeat there, right? If you're saying I'm an alcoholic, period, then doesn't that mean that you're going to drink? And paradoxically, the answer is no. Paradoxically, what happens when you accept is it actually allows you to gain control over the behavior. So let's kind of go into this for a second. So oftentimes what happens in addiction, and this is what sort of ACT posits, is that it's our ability to it's our attempts to resist the addiction that actually cause us the most problems. And so by accepting the fact that we're addicted, once you sort of accept that foundation, then suddenly you can actually gain power over it, which I know sounds really paradoxical, because if you accept that you're powerless in the face of alcohol, which is what AA espouses, then how on earth do you get control over it? And that's kind of weird. But that's sort of how it works. We just sort of know that from a data perspective. And I'll try to explain a little bit of my understanding of how that works. So as long as I can win against alcohol, the addict's brain is going to have a field day with that. And if you look at people who struggle with addictions, oftentimes what you find is this sense that I can win, right? I can manage it. I can fix it. I can reduce it. I can control it. But the problem is that all of those thoughts of okay, I can manage it as long as I don't get a DUI. Drinking is fine as long as I don't drive drunk. Drinking is fine as long as ... Playing games is fine as long as ... You know, I can get high as long as ... Right? That stuff doesn't apply to me. I am in control. The problem is that when you have that thought in your head that I am in control or I can gain control, oftentimes that is the thought that your addiction thrives on. That's what it uses, because it tells you, because it knows that it's actually in control. The only way that the addiction can guarantee success is if it can convince you that you are in control. And so this kind of goes to almost like this saying that, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist. Right? So as long as your addiction can convince you that you're in control and that you can handle it, you're going to keep using. And we sort of see that, right? We see that people who insist on getting in control, they're the ones who end up in the biggest problems. And so what Alcoholics Anonymous sort of realized, what the original person, the guy who wrote the big book, I forget his name, what he kind of realized is the first step is admitting that you're going to lose. And interestingly enough, by admitting that you're going to lose, all of the tactics that your addiction uses, the trump card that your addiction actually plays, it's like secret weapon that you don't even know that it's using it, right? It's actually, you think you're using it, but it's using you. It's controlling you. So what you're actually doing is taking away the trump card by sort of saying, hi, my name is Alok, I'm an alcoholic, and I'm powerless in the face of alcohol. Because if you're powerless in the face of alcohol, going to the barbecue, you're not going to be able to resist. So don't go to the barbecue. If you're powerless in the face of alcohol, it doesn't matter whether you can control it or not control it. I got to go to the meeting every single day. That's what it takes. Have any shot of any kind of success. And failure is kind of around the corner. And so this is sort of what AA's kind of discovered with acceptance. AA has some problems with it, I think, generally speaking. And so, there are certain adaptations, which there's certain things about AA that don't fit with people, which I think makes a lot of sense. So I personally think that AA is a little bit too disempowering. I think it's better to understand the trick that your mind does than assume that you're actually powerless, because I think you are powerful. You are in control as long as your mind isn't tricking you. And so that's the attitude that I take. So I think there are a lot of issues with AA. And also it doesn't work for everyone, right? So then what happened is people took this kind of ability of acceptance, and then they applied it to acceptance and commitment therapy. And they removed a lot of the bad stuff from AA, and they kind of applied it to ACT. ACT is an evidence-based treatment for addiction, so that works really well. So then the question kind of becomes, okay, let's talk about you for a moment, and acceptance versus learned helplessness, and what's the difference? So learned helplessness is about the future, right? So if we think about it very simply, in learned helplessness, I am here now, and there's no point in trying because of something in the future. I realize that looks weird, in the wrong direction. So we're looking into the future, and there's no point in trying because it's not going to work. So learned helplessness is forward thinking in its nature. It's like looking into the future and saying there's no point in trying now. The interesting thing about acceptance is acceptance brings you to the present. So acceptance is how you get out of the future and especially out of the past. So a lot of times what will happen is, until you accept what has happened to you, you're kind of stuck in the past. You're like engaged in contrafactual thinking, which I don't know if y'all remember we talked about, but our mind has this ability to go back into the past and hypothesize a different set of outcomes. If only I had ... So when you're struggling in the present, sometimes what the mind does, it goes into the past and it starts thinking, if only I had ... If only I had studied harder, if only I had taken classes seriously, if only I hadn't dated this person, if only I hadn't done this, then I wouldn't be in this scenario right now. And so what your mind actually spends its time doing is, instead of focusing on the present and focusing on what you can do to get out of this, all it thinks about is what you should have done differently to avoid the situation. Which, if you think about it, is cognitive energy that will never help you, because you can't actually go back into time. It's like all of your problem-solving energy is going to rewrite the past, which is physically impossible, instead of trying to figure out what to do in the present. So this is where acceptance comes in. So acceptance sort of takes all that crap from the past and then takes all that crap from the past and then kind of like lets it all go. And then you kind of accept where you are now, right? So if I accept, I'll say, but I didn't take it seriously, right? I did end up dating that person. Or in the case of something like grief, like that person did pass away, right? I did lose a loved one, and that I have to accept that. Because until you accept that, you're kind of stuck in that past. If only I had done this, if only I'd done this, if only I'd done this. And that's part of the grieving process. So we also know that the grieving process involves acceptance, and that, generally speaking, is a healthy thing to go through. So when you actually accept, what it helps you do is sit in the present and then actually look forward to the future in a positive way. Whereas learned helplessness is all about making an assumption about the future that makes you not act today. And this is what's really confusing about acceptance, is a lot of people think, okay, if I accept that I failed out of college, doesn't that mean that I don't do anything? No, actually the opposite. So when you accept that you failed college, okay, here I am now, I failed out of college. What am I going to do about it? Where do I go from here? And generally speaking, when you lean into acceptance and you learn how to accept, you accept your present circumstances, and then there's a natural tendency to start like looking to the future in sort of a positive way. But even looking to the future is not about looking out here. It's about, okay, what can I do now? What's the first step that I can take that'll help me like put my life together? And that's what acceptance entails. So acceptance just helps us move to the present, helps us get out of the past, because as long as we're stuck in the past, it's going to be really hard to act. And the problem with learned helplessness is that's when we're stuck in the future, and we assume that any action that we take is not going to be successful. But just because I accept that in the past I have failed does not mean that I'm going to continue to fail, right? And this is what confuses a lot of people, is they assume that, okay, if you accept that you are a failure, no, that's not what you accept, right? I am a failure is actually learned helplessness. What you accept is that you have failed, period. And that if you had done things differently, sure, you could have changed stuff, but you can still do things differently now, right? You still have a choice now. And how you choose to live the next day of your life, the next hour of your life, the next month of your life is still up to you and under your control. And that comes through acceptance. So a lot of this stuff is like all about developing a present focus. And this is what yoga essentially discovered. All this stuff is rooted in yoga. All this mindfulness stuff, DBT, ACT, it's all rooted in yoga. And I'm pretty sure that's a historically accurate statement. I imagine I'm biased there, but also it seems like it's pretty historically accurate. So if you kind of look at that, like this present focus stuff is what's really, really powerful in terms of putting your life together. And generally speaking, when people accept, it helps them put their life together. Whereas learned helplessness is kind of like a strategy to avoid pain through avoiding effort. So since I'm going to fail, I might as well not try. And then like, at least I'll protect myself from the disappointment of hope. Because that's what really happens in learned helplessness, is that you learn over time that hoping and failing is painful. So what we're going to do is we're going to like shoot for like neutral, and we're going to shoot for numbness. And by shooting for numbness and not trying to achieve anything, like we protect ourselves from disappointment and the feeling of failure. So, questions? Can acceptance be used with obsessive thoughts? How do I use it? Great question. This is why I love yoga. So what yoga would say is accept that you have obsessive thoughts, right? It doesn't mean that you have to agree with the thoughts, but you can accept that your mind is obsessed with something. And you could say, this is just the way that my mind is, right? So like sometimes if you got an old war injury and when the weather gets cold, your war injury aches. That's just what it's going to do when the weather gets cold. When it gets damp, my bones ache. And is that unfortunate? Sure. Does it cause you some degree of pain? Absolutely. Does it suck for you? Yes. And you can just kind of accept it. And so oftentimes what I do when I'm working with people who have obsessive thoughts is that they can sort of, with detachment, learn to accept that their mind produces obsessive thoughts. And by doing that, what you actually do, the problem with obsessive thoughts is that we get caught up in them, right? We start to think that our mind is correct. We start to think that our thoughts are facts. This is in cognitive behavioral therapy, what's called thought fusion. In yoga, it's called attachment. And so the solution there is to detach from our mind and just acknowledge that like there's a difference between I want a hamburger and my body wants a hamburger or my mind wants a hamburger. Right? There's some distance that you can gain from. And especially when I work with people who are psychotic, that works very well, delusional. And it's like, I have no idea whether you're correct or incorrect with your delusions. It's not my place to say. I'm not the arbiter of truth. It's fine for your mind to produce these thoughts. The question is, do you want to act in accordance with the thoughts that your mind produces? Yes or no? And that applies for delusions. It applies for anxiety. It applies for insecurity. That your actions and how you behave does not have to be in accordance with those thoughts. You know, when I work with people who are delusional, what they tend to discover is like, that works really well if they practice it and they give it a shot. And they may sometimes feel terrified if they think the FBI is watching them. It's like you can't convince them by nature of their illness that their FBI isn't watching them. I can't give them proof. And who knows, like maybe the FBI is watching them. I actually had one case of someone that was actually being followed by the FBI, as it turns out. Right? So you have no idea what's going on. It's bizarre, I know. So, but the point is like the question, at least, you know, when I'm working with a patient like that is like, do you want to keep the FBI watching you from leaving your house? It's like, if you leave the house, like forget about whether the FBI is watching you or not. Do you want to leave the house or not? Well, I hate being at home. Well, like, do they watch you at home? They're like, yeah. All right, so then go out anyway. Like, if they're watching you, might as well go to a park and hang out and have a good time. And then eventually someone's like, oh, okay, I'll try that. And I'll be like, how'd that go going to the park? And they're like, well, you're right, the FBI followed me. And I was like, I'm not sure I ever said that. But, you know, at least I had a good time. I was like, cool. So you going to do it again this week? They're like, yeah, I'm thinking about going out again this week. I was like, great. Right? So you can detach from your thoughts. And that's very possible. It's hard, don't get me wrong. It's not easy. It takes effort, and this is where things like practices like meditation, even doing things like psychotherapy can be very helpful. But you can absolutely detach from them. Yeah, so it looks like there's some, I'll be fresh as hell if the Fed's watching, Chains the second, and I see like two people, Knight and Julk, are both quoting the same thing. So how do you avoid falling from detachment into apathy? The two are completely different. Okay? So this is the big problem that people have with acceptance. They think that acceptance means apathy. Apathy is actually in the learned helplessness, right? So if we think about apathy, I don't care. There's no point in trying. That's apathy. But detachment is not caring. It's acknowledging you can still want things and be detached. The difference is acknowledging that things are kind of like out of your control. So I can want to go on a date with someone, but I also don't have to be attached to it. It's like, yeah, it'd be great if this happened. I'd really enjoy it. I'm really looking forward to it. And at the end of the day, there are 1,000 reasons why it may not happen. And if one of those things comes to pass, so be it, right? Like life is the kind of situation where you don't get everything that you want. And then if you go into learned helplessness or apathy, so then why bother trying? No. That's where you cross the line. right? So this person didn't want to go on a date with me, which is okay. Am I disappointed? Sure. It would have been awesome if they were willing to give me a shot. And there are other fish in the sea, right? So I don't have to let it get me down. I can try again. There are lots of different options out there. I can also have a fruitful weekend if this person, if I'm not going to go on a date with this weekend, I can go hang out with my friends. I can play some D&D. I can do all kinds of stuff. So that's where detachment comes in. Detachment isn't about not enjoying life or being numb. It's about letting go of the outcomes of your actions and actually fully devoting yourself to the action itself. And this is where, like, even when I work with medical students, a lot of medical students are very interested in getting A's because that's what they've been conditioned to do their entire life. Middle school, A's. High school, A's. College, A's. Applying to med school, I've got a 3.98 GPA. And are they so resentful it's not a 4.0? And then they wind up in med school. And eventually I have to have a conversation with them about, your grades don't matter. I don't think you get it. A few years from now, you're going to be in an elevator and someone's going to have a heart attack. Are you going to be able to save that person's life or not? Who the hell cares whether you get an A or not? I don't think you understand. You're here to learn medicine. So learn medicine and forget about the grade. Recognize that what we're teaching you will either save lives or you won't learn it well enough and you may not be able to save that life. That's what you should focus on. So focus on the learning, not the outcome. And the med students who get that do really well. Paradoxically, once again. Right? Because then they focus on learning the material, which tends to translate into doing well on the tests. But they're learning the material for the sake of learning the material. And so it's that same kind of thing. It's really tricky. It's subtle. But detachment and apathy are the opposite. Apathy is not caring in the sense of numbing yourself, whereas detachment is about acknowledging that there's only so much that you can do and then actually giving it your all. Because usually people who are detached can give it their all. Because once you free yourself from all the shame and all the other crap, then you can just focus on the thing. Right? I can ask this person out and it's because I'm looking for a relationship and I'm going to give everything that I can to this relationship. And if it didn't work out, it didn't work out. So be it. I can't control another person's behavior. I can't control the circumstances of their life. But I gave it everything I could, and the next time around, I'm going to do the same damn thing. So detachment paradoxically allows you to live life with the opposite of apathy. And it sort of protects you against a lot of the suffering. Okay. Isn't that the norm, or was the norm? That's why we're here. 100%. It is the norm. That's why we're here. Right? So people don't understand detachment or vairagya. It's a concept that has been lost. And that's where it sprinkles in through some of these things like Alcoholics Anonymous and acceptance and commitment therapy. And definitely in the case of ACT, it was inspired by Eastern teachings, but I don't think that Alcoholics Anonymous was inspired by yoga. I think it's just a truth of how human beings work, and anyone who does that kind of exploration will come to the same conclusion, which is what I think happened in AA. They discovered it on their own. And that's why, the world is suffering, because we've become so attached. And if you want to see what attachment looks like, just go look at Twitter, where everyone's attached to all kinds of stuff, right? And they can't let anything go. It's like some random person that you've never heard of said something that's stupid. Let me go correct them and disabuse them of their idiocy. Right? And that's why Twitter succeeds, because it preys on our attachment. And then what's happening when people are doing, when people are jousting over Twitter all day long? And what is that doing for the world? Sometimes, certainly, Twitter can be used as a tool for good, right? We all have some of these things like Me Too and if there are protests and stuff like that, or if there's some kind of political stuff going on, sometimes you can use Arab Spring, and Twitter can absolutely be a tool for good. But is that what we do most of the time? No, most of the time what we tend to do is we get to be very egotistical. We go around, we try to put other people in their places, and we in turn usually get owned in the process. Because when we tweet about something, there's 1,000 people out there, or 1 million people, or 1 billion people out there. And the one person that knows how to own you is going to respond. And so it's just ownage, right, left, and center. And what's happening? Is the world becoming a better place? I don't think so. Can it be used as a tool for good? Yes, 100%. But, when you get owned on Twitter, what do? You just pretend it didn't happen, right? Or use some kind of cognitive gymnastics to not get owned. How do you know if you are avoiding the emotion by being in the present, like rationalizing? So that's a great question. Rationalizing is not being in the present, first of all. So rationalizing is avoiding the emotion. So what's happening in rationalizing is the emotion is fueling a rationalization that allows you to discount the emotion. Being in the present is usually sitting with the emotion. So it's not being in the present and avoiding emotion are not, those are mutually exclusive. The whole point of being in the present is you're there with whatever's there. Avoidance of emotion is about moving away from the present, right? Like, does that make sense? If I'm feeling sad right now and I want to avoid that emotion, I'm not being in the present. The whole point is avoidance, like this is what is, and I'm like moving away from that. That's where rationalizing comes in. And you can't avoid the present. In fact, moving into the future and moving into the past are the ways that you avoid the present. Like, does that make sense? It's like so simple. But like you can't be in the present and the future in the same time. That's what your mind does. That's why we engage in contrafactual thinking, which is going back in time and rewriting history. Because we're avoiding the present. That's why we think about the future. That's why we have daydreams like maladaptive daydreaming. That's also why we are hopeless about the future. Because the interesting thing is if I'm hopeless about the future, it gives me a free pass in the present. I don't have to do anything right now. You ever think about that? Right? It's kind of weird. But you have a pass for doing nothing in the present. Right? So if I'm doomed to be alone forever because the opposite sex or whatever sex I'm attracted to is all shallow and useless and all they care about are things that I don't have, then if it's futile, then I don't have to do anything. Right? All I get to do is bitch at people on Twitter all day long about how unfair the world is instead of actually doing anything to fix my life. I can blame the world. And then I don't have to then my body doesn't have to get up out of the chair and start exercising and clean my house and all this other crap that my body doesn't want to do. I don't have to clean out my fridge and go buy groceries and cook every day and wake up at 6 a.m. Like, think about how much your body and mind hate doing that crap. And when you give up on the future, when things are helpless, when you have learned helplessness, you have a pass for all that stuff. You don't have to do any of that little crap. Why bother? Right? So really what your mind is getting out of that is the ability to be like completely chill in the present. The absolution of all responsibilities from today. That's what learned helplessness buys you. And that's why it's so hard to kick. Because if you can do something about it, then it maybe is your fault. And if you can do something about it, maybe you do need to work your ass off. But the thing is, I don't want to work my ass off. And I don't want it to be my fault. So what I'm going to end up doing is leaning into helplessness. Because that's how my addictive mind can just play video games all day. Easy. Y'all get that? It's tricky. Yeah, as Fern DeLuna is saying, take back your agency 100%. You don't even have to, take back is a good sense. I'd say pick it up. Because it's not like you gave it away, you just set it down. Right? But how? You start with the smallest thing that you can do today. You live in the present. Right? So when people say the smallest thing, why do we use the word small? It's because if we think about something big, what does your mind do? It sneaks in. Oh my God, that's too hard. Oh my God, it's not going to work. Oh my God, I can't afford to mess it up. So the second you start adding, because if something is big, then the dimension of time enters, right? You can eat healthy today. You can 100% eat healthy today, but you can't diet for 10 weeks. Like, that's hard. And so your mind is like, oh, it's hard to diet for 10 weeks. So why bother eating healthy today if I can't do it for the full 10 weeks? If I need my beach bod in 10 weeks time, that's going to be hard. So don't bother. So the second the dimension of time enters, you're screwed. And what happens to your mind is tricky. It's sneaky, right? Because what it looks at is it looks at, oh my God, like imagine how many years it's going to take to put your life together. And it may not even work. And the mind is like, don't bother. It's not worth it. Right? So the second time enters, helplessness enters with it. Because then your mind says, it's futile. What's the point of eating healthy for one day? And this is where detachment comes in, because it doesn't matter, because we're not worried about the outcome. Who cares about the outcome? Whether it succeeds or whether it fails, I'm going to eat healthy today. It's the one thing I'm going to do. And your mind is like, no, but don't do that. What do you mean? We care about the future. No. You got to think about the future. It's not going to be enough. What do you mean you're not going to give me a cheeseburger? What the fuck, bro? Come on. Right? Koji Korma saying, what's the point of not smoking a blunt? Exactly. Like, why bother? Just smoke the blunt. Because what your mind wants is the blunt. It wants the cheeseburger. It wants the video games. It wants that dopamine. It wants to relax. Wants to be numb. Wants those cannabinoids. Like, whatever you want. It doesn't want to deal with those emotions that you've been bottling up and bearing inside you for a long time. Right? Because if you start to eat healthy today, like the feelings of inadequacy come up, the feelings of, oh, what do you think you're doing? You think you're going to lose weight? You ugly sucker. Right? You look at yourself in the mirror and all the self-loathing comes up. You have to deal with all that crap. And it's like, no, we're going to set all that crap aside. I'm just going to eat healthy today. Right? You guys get that? That's the thoughts that happen. Too far? I apologize then. Who talks to themselves like that? You'd be surprised. Unfortunately, some people do. And oftentimes they don't talk to themselves that way. They have that reaction in their mind and they do their level best to push it away instead of letting that reaction wash through them. Right? You can also accept your self-loathing. You can say, there's a part of myself that really hates myself. And that's okay. Right? Because the paradox there is that if you judge yourself harshly, you're just falling into the trap by judging the part that judges you. Right? So you can accept that part. It's okay for a part of me to be like angry with myself. It's okay for a part of me to hate myself. You can accept it. You can give it a hug. But instead what we do is we're like, no, I'm such a bad person for self-loathing. Why can't I be more self-loving? I'm so stupid, I can't even love myself. It's like the most basic thing. And it's like, no, wait. The bizarre thing is what you have to do is accept it. It's paradoxical. Right? It's like even like, okay, so there's a part, I hate a part of myself. That's okay. Like there's a good reason for that, right? Because a lot of stuff I've done in my life, I'm not very proud of. I could have done things differently. So it makes sense that I hate myself. Like I can accept that. And I don't have to give into it. Y'all get that? So Piff502 is saying, where is the accept button? That is a beautiful question. Yeah, so that's something that I encourage you to ask yourselves. Where is the accept button in my mind? How do I accept this? Just ask yourself. Looking for it, you'll be surprised. It may be easier to find if you ask yourself that question. Yeah, so Miss Jackson is saying, I have no idea how to love myself at all. And I see we have a response from Normie 987. Try to imagine how Dr. K would talk to you. So that's like actually kind of cool and may actually work. So I think we've learned this in our community that people who watch a lot of our stuff will start to talk like I do, which I don't talk in a unique way, right? So this is the way that we're trained to talk. If you train to become a monk, and if you train to become a therapist, you will talk the way that I do. It's not like I talk in a unique way. This is the consequence of training. And then the interesting thing is self-dialogue if you think about self-dialogue, where do you learn where do you learn how you talk to yourself based on the way that you're taught to talk to yourself? So generally speaking, people who talk to themselves in a very toxic way were talked to in a very toxic way. And people who are talked to in a loving way, like, have confidence in themselves. So the hard thing, this is also something that we don't like to admit as a society. So when someone has mental health problems, we make it the responsibility of the person, right? So like even employers will, if we think about it, it's like, okay, like it's a medical condition, it's private, it's personal, it's your responsibility, and we don't have anything to do with it. It's mental illness. And what we need is more therapists out there. We need an army of therapists who will fix people with the malfunctions in their mind. And the reason that mental health is getting so much damn worse is because as a society, we have stopped accepting responsibility for the mental health of people around us. Right? Y'all get that? It's like if someone's depressed, that's on them. It's not on me. It ain't on me. And so as we have absolved ourselves of the responsibility of our fellow human beings and their health and their happiness, this is why mental health is going into the shitter, in a nutshell. Because it's not my problem. But the truth of the matter is, like, I don't know how to say this, but like, it's so damn simple. But like, people hate themselves because of what other people do to them. You know, like, you don't have a 2-year-old who hates themselves. Like, people like despair because of what people do to them. Right? We understand, like, trauma is the only diagnosis that we have where we kind of acknowledge that someone else did something to you and that's why you're suffering. But for things like anxiety, we don't conceptualize that as trauma. But even if you look at the treatment of anxiety, it's almost treated in the same way. When did you learn to become anxious? And so that's what I like about the yogic system of Vedic psychology, because they understand, like, the basic ideas that everything that your mind produces, it learned in some way. And so understand the origins of the lessons that your mind learned if you really want to get mastery over it. For the record, we do need more therapists. Right? I'm not advocating for less therapists. We do need more mental health treatment. We need better mental health treatment, 100%. But I think that as we're learning, I just saw a study today about exercise and its effect on depression and how good it is for people who are depressed. But like, we also need to understand that you can't therapize all the problems of the world away, right? Like, that's not a winning strategy. You sometimes have to like fix things in the world. You can't just, if someone is like homeless and impoverished, you can't therapize them to a happy and fulfilling life. Therapy certainly can help, but like, we also have to like do things to fix them, or fix their life, I should say. Right? And similarly, like, if you're alone, we can therapize you to being like undoing some of that emotional damage. But at the end of the day, if you're lonely and you want a relationship, like, your road to happiness is going to be finding a relationship, which is also something that we hate to admit. It doesn't necessarily have to be that way. Some people can learn to accept and acknowledge that they're never going to be in a relationship and find happiness that way. That does kind of work. But for most people, I'd say, like, if you've got some problem in your life, like, sure, see a therapist, but also fix that problem. That's why we do what we do. That's why I'm not in an office seeing patients anymore. Okay? All right. We got time for one more. Yeah, that's so. Acid Demon says that sort of hit home. I had a guy tell me today that we weren't fit for the long term after I told him I had anxiety and it was sort of getting to me. But a lot of my anxiety comes from what I've dealt with. Yeah, 100%. So I think the other thing that you've got to be super careful about is assuming that his statement of we weren't fit for the long term is a response to I have anxiety. Because if you're not careful, you're going to learn a bad lesson from that, which will protect you, because then if you don't tell people that you have anxiety, maybe they won't say that, which is the lesson that your mind will learn. But then what's going to start happening is you're going to start not living authentically, which is going to cause more problems down the line. So the hardest thing for someone with anxiety is giving someone the opportunity to reject them, which you should absolutely be doing. Because once you give someone the opportunity to reject you, you also give someone the opportunity to accept you. And once you show people how busted you are and they stay anyway, that's how you get fixed. right? That's when someone sends you that really important signal, which is you matter, and I don't care that you have anxiety. You have intrinsic worth as a human being that your anxiety does not wipe away. And the problem is that that's the message that like you really need to heal. The other big challenge is that sometimes that message is most easily delivered from another person, right? Which is what I'm saying is like we have a responsibility to each other to like try to support each other through this stuff, because it's not like life is not a solo player game. It's just not. Okay, we've got one more. Yeah, well, we need community. That's what we've got here. Thanks to y'all. Okay. Has Dr. K ever made a video on passive-aggressive coworkers and slash managers? I don't know if anyone else feels this way, but I would love to see a video with Dr. K explaining how people fall into these traps of taking on passive-aggressive behavior once they get some type of power in the work environment. I think a video in the format like how Dr. K did the psychology of a Karen would benefit employees with dealing with coworkers and managers that fall in that category, but also help employees up for promotions not fall into the same trap. Not saying all managers, but I'm sure we all have a story and could use some guidance on how to navigate our emotions and feelings when dealing with these people. What do y'all think? I just really would like to understand passive-aggressive more, so I'm not so reactive when interacting with them. This is a fantastic request in a sense, but let's talk a little bit about passive-aggressive. So this is tricky because we all experience passive aggressiveness, but once again, like there aren't really good resources, at least that I've seen. I mean, I'm sure now that I think about it, I'm sure they're out there, but about like what is passive aggressiveness? Like where does it come from and how do you deal with it? So this is just going to be one take on it. Okay. So what we're going to start with is talking a little bit about where passive aggressiveness comes from and the different kinds of passive aggressiveness. Then once we understand what causes people to be passive aggressive, we can also learn a couple of ways to deal with it. Now, the big challenge here is that most of my work with passive aggressive behavior comes from the people who are passive aggressive, right? So if you think about like what I actually do, I'll work with individuals. I usually don't work with people who complain about third parties. So the focus that I have is like, okay, let's figure out your own passive aggressive behavior and how to get rid of that. But we can sort of talk a little bit about all of the above, okay? So let's begin. Okay. So how to deal with people who are passive aggressive. Oh. Up. Make sense? Good use of our time, chat? They're so good at passive aggressiveness, I can't confront them? Ah, yes, we will help you with that, my friend. Don't worry. Don't worry, not all hope is lost, Charmy. We will not only give you some clues on how to confront them, we will do more than that. So, first of all, let's try to understand a couple of different perspectives on what it means to be passive aggressive and where that comes from. So generally speaking, when I think about the term passive aggressive, it's when someone sort of like attacks you without attacking you. Right? They don't say something explicit. So there's a lot of like implicit communication. There's a lot of like non-direct attacks. And what makes passive aggressive people so hard to deal with is like they're doing crap to you, but then like you can't really like do anything back because they're not really attacking you, right? So it's almost one of these things where it's like what a lot of passive aggressive people will do is they'll bait you into getting upset with them. And then it's all, honestly, what it reminds me of is I've been watching some Elden Ring PvP videos, and it's like the parry followed by like the critical hit or the riposte, right? Riposte, however you pronounce it, where it's like, they kind of debate you into attacking them and they're waiting for it. And the second that you attack them back, they play the victim. They're like, I don't know what you're talking about. Why are you being so toxic to me? And then they chunk away half your health or they one-shot you. So it's really, really challenging because you can't really respond. So how do you deal with this? So let's start with understanding, where passive aggressiveness comes from. So we're going to offer a couple of different theories here. This is just based on my perspective. So the first is like kind of a Freudian theory. So if we want to understand passive aggressiveness, we can actually go back to Freud. And Freud had some good stuff. So Freud said that we have three parts of the mind: the id, the ego, and the superego. And what he said is that the id is our impulses, right? These are our like natural desires, these kind of base animalistic desires. And then we have our superego, which is like our morality, right? This is our sense of like right and wrong. It's like, do I want to eat a cheeseburger? Hell yeah, I want to eat a cheeseburger, but I should eat a salad. So the word should comes from here. The word want comes from here. And so oftentimes in our life, there is a conflict between the shoulds and the wants. Enter the ego, the mediator. So the ego is what mediates conflicts between the id and the superego. And the ego, and this, I'm sure that I'm getting some of this wrong because I'm not an expert in Freud. And then Anna Freud, I think Freud's daughter, came up with a lot of these like defense mechanisms. So this is where like the defense mechanisms come in play. And so what tends to happen is that we'll have some kind of id feeling, and then a defense will activate. And it'll take that id feeling and it'll move it into the subconscious. And it'll kind of live over here. And even though this is kind of the conscious mind of what we're aware of, so we're not going to attack anyone up here. No attack. But these like negative feelings will kind of boil to the surface and kind of create passive aggressive behaviors. So what I've oftentimes found is that the passive aggressiveness comes from feelings that we don't want ourselves to feel, right? So like if we're feeling embarrassed or ashamed of something, but like we're not willing to help ourselves feel that, we'll do some kind of like passive aggressive kind of thing. So I'll give you all just a simple example. So let's say, I'm dating someone, and boy or girl doesn't matter. There's a boys' night out or there's a girls' night out. And in the girls' night out or boys' night out, my partner asks me, hey, I want to go on a boys' night out or I want to go on a girls' night out. Do you have a problem with that? And then what I'm going to say is, no, you should do whatever you want to do. They're like, wait, are you upset about that? Do you want me to like not go? No, you do whatever you think is right. And then like, it's kind of like this weird sort of situation where you're not explicit about what your needs are, right? So you actually don't want them to go. Maybe you're feeling insecure, but you're not letting yourself admit the insecurity or acknowledge the insecurity. So it's floating around down here, and then you get to this like, you do whatever you think is best. And the person is explicitly asking you. They're like, what should I do? But I'm not controlling. So I can't tell my partner to not go, because that makes me a bad boyfriend or girlfriend. Like, that's crazy. Like, I'm not jealous. I'm not these things, right? So this is the superego thought. I shouldn't be jealous. I shouldn't be controlling. And so what we do is we take that insecurity and we shove it way down, and then it comes out with these kinds of like, no, you do what you think is best. And then they go out with their friends, and then you give them the silent treatment for a week. And then it gets even worse because and then they get frustrated. They're like, if you told me that you didn't want me to go, you should have just said so. But then you're like, well, that's stupid, right? Because then I'm going to be an idiot. And so I'm acting like an idiot. And then that drives the feelings of being an idiot get driven down here. And then now we've got this thing, and then it just exacerbates the passive aggressive behavior. And it's just like a cycle. Okay? So this is one perspective. So in this perspective, what we really want, if you want to understand passive aggressive behavior, what we're going to do, this will become important later, is recognize what could this person be feeling or wanting that they're not really letting themselves feel or want or publicly own. And that will give you insight into what will trigger the passive aggressive behavior. Because it's essentially passive aggressive behavior is I'm not allowed to attack you, but I really want to, so I'm going to do it anyway. I'm just going to do it passively. That's one perspective. Okay? So another perspective comes from kind of relationship dynamics. So sometimes there's this weird, psychological stuff going on, but sometimes people are just conditioned to be passive aggressive. So they'll grow up in kind of situations where, like, parents will be emotionally manipulative. And so their parents were passive aggressive with them, right? Where it's like, oh no, like it's your allowance, you can spend it however you want to. But if you spend it in a way that I don't approve of, I'm going to emotionally punish you in the future. And furthermore, I'm going to tell you it's for your own good. So I gave you this money. I didn't want you to buy the video game. You bought the video game. And so now when you ask me if you can go to your friend's house for the summer, I'm not going to say no because you bought the video game. What I'm going to say is the way you spent your money indicates to me that you don't have the maturity to handle yourself and handle your finances, so you can't go spend the summer with your friend. Wait, but you told me to do whatever I want to. Yeah, I did. And you did whatever you want to, but you're not indicating to me that you're mature enough. So like parents will do this crap, right? Where they're unhappy with your choices, but they won't say, I'm unhappy with your choices. They'll twist it and turn it into some kind of weird passive aggressive BS. And then what happens? You grow up in this environment. You are conditioned, just like you learn slang. So I use the word y'all. My kids probably use the word y'all. I grew up in Texas. We use the word y'all. I get conditioned to it. In that same way, from a relationship dynamic perspective, oftentimes people who engage in passive aggressive behavior just understand that that's the way that stuff works, right? So you see this kind of stuff a lot in Indian joint households because overt conflict is not tolerated. So you also see all this like political BS in the household because you've got like 3 generations of people living together. You're living with your brother and his wife and their kids, and you guys don't make the same amount of money, and there's all this kind of weird political BS where people will like jockey for position. So you'll sometimes also see this in the workplace, in Indian joint households. I imagine other joint households as well, like non-Indian ones. These are just the ones that I have the most insight into from like friends and family and stuff. Right? But like I've talked to people who are from Southeast Asia who go through the same stuff. So sometimes this is just the way of exerting like influence on other people. So a couple of things that will bring this out. One is feelings of territorial nature, power dynamics, feeling threatened. So at work, if you outshine your colleagues on a project, they may feel threatened. But this is also a key thing where there's no direct acceptable avenue to exercise feelings. So if I feel like everyone says you did a great job, I feel jealous. And there's no way for me to I can't fault you for doing a good job at the company, right? Even though it makes me feel bad. Makes me feel threatened, makes me feel less adequate. But I can't be like, why did you do so well this month in sales? And so instead what I'll do is I'll say like, oh, congratulations. Like, you must have worked really hard. Like, that's so good for you. And inside I'm seething. I start to feel territorial. I start to feel threatened by you. And all this passive aggressive crap is going to come out because I'm not allowed to attack you. Right? So the other thing about relationship dynamics is what we see about passive aggressive attacks is that it's a safe way to attack without retaliation. So I'm going to start doing little things like, oh, your client's called and I take a message and then I never give you the message. Right? And I can just claim, oh, I forgot, or I did tell you, or I just pretend they didn't call. So you can kind of like claim ignorance. Oh, my bad. Right? There's all kinds of like weird, shady stuff that goes on. And some people just manage relationships like this. Third thing. This one's going to be tough. Okay, so third reason why people are passive aggressive with you is because of misperception or your cognitive bias. So if you think people are being passive aggressive with you at work, newsflash, maybe they're not actually being passive aggressive with you. Maybe, so let's think about this, okay? This may sound kind of weird. So how would I know whether someone is being passive aggressive or whether they're just not doing anything? Because the whole point about passive aggressive is that it's no overt attack, right? They're not actually saying you're a bad person or anything like that. Maybe they did actually just forget to pass along the message, or even wilder, maybe they did pass along the message and you forgot. So sometimes, not kidding here, this is unfortunate, but sometimes when I come in, when I work with people who say, hey, someone at work is super passive aggressive, the more we tunnel down into it, the more that we discover that the person actually isn't passive aggressive. They're just not attacking you. They're just doing things that you perceive as attacks. So I'll give you all kind of like a simple example of this, which is somewhat chimerical. But, I was once working with someone who told me that they were getting married and this is supposed to be their perfect day. And they were like, I can't believe my sister is making me look bad by losing all of this weight. And I was like, what? And they're like, yeah, like my sister, in high school, I used to be thinner and she used to be like kind of heavy set. And then like over the last year and a half, she's been like trying to like lose a bunch of weight and like making me look bad, like in my wedding dress. And I'm like, what do you, right? But she won't ever say it. She's just doing it to attack me. Like that's sort of the story that I got. And that it sort of doesn't compute, right? But this is where in the mind of this person, and unfortunately all examples are that extreme. But what we sometimes see is that when we have insecurities and these insecurities feel attacked or threatened, what we'll end up doing, but they're not actually attacked, right? The sister isn't showing up and saying, you're a fat ass. That's not what the sister is saying. The sister isn't really doing anything to you. But the problem is that you feel insecure. You perceive it as an attack. There isn't some kind of overt behavior. There's no overt behavior. And so then you conclude that this person is behaving passive aggressively. But unfortunately, if we want to be complete, what we have to acknowledge is part of the reason that people are acting passive aggressive is actually because of your own misperception and your own bias. So sometimes the solution is not in the way that you deal with them, but in the way that you explore yourself. So how do you get kind of clued into this? A couple of things is like, when you feel like someone is being passive aggressive with you, what is the state of your internal security around it? So if you feel insecure about something, there's a greater chance that this is at least a piece of the puzzle. Whereas if you feel very confident or secure about something, this is less likely to be the case. So if you feel attacked or threatened by what they're doing, like, oh, this person is like, you have to be a little bit careful there. So sometimes the solution is actually dealing with yourself, okay? So just to recap, when we're talking about passive-aggressive behavior, we can take kind of a Freudian approach, which is that I'm not allowed to act or feel the things that I feel, so I'm going to bury my feelings in my subconscious, and they're going to get kind of exerted. They're going to bubble to the surface in non-direct attacks, and that's kind of where it comes from. Second thing is sometimes we're just conditioned to be passive-aggressive. That's just how people play the game. So you'll see this in certain kinds of companies. You'll see it in politics. You'll see it in things like joint households. And it's sort of just the way that we jockey for power because there's no acceptable avenue for exercising that feeling, either through discussion or direct attacks. Those aren't an option. So all we're left with is this weird passive-aggressive BS. As a technique, it's a very safe way to attack without retaliation because you can claim ignorance. These kinds of relationship dynamics I find in the workplace are very, very territorial in nature and have to do with power and feeling threatened. So you'll see a huge escalation if you're doing a good job at work and someone else feels threatened, including your boss. right? Like if someone's feeling jealous or threatened, this kind of crap will crop up more. So how to deal with it? So this question was sort of related to work, so we're going to kind of focus on that a little bit. So the first thing to understand about passive aggressive behavior is, do you need a relationship with this person or not? So this is a very, very important fork in the road. So if you need a relationship with this person, and you want to cultivate a positive relationship with this person, then your approach is going to be very different. So let's say that the answer is yes. So we'll use the example of not a work example, but I think it's better illustrated by a personal example. Let's say that your partner is being passive aggressive. So you don't want to just, ditch them and move on, right? You have to work through this. So if you need to have a relationship with them, I would start by talking with them. And the key thing here is that if you point out the passive aggressive behavior, if you say, Mom or Dad, you gave me the money, you said I could spend it however I want to, but because you're saying because of the way that I spent it, I understand that you have a rationale, but you're saying that because of the way that I spent it, you're not letting me go. And what I'm also hearing is that if I had spent it differently, I could go. Is that correct? And the tricky thing there is that the more you have to be subtle with the way that you point it out to them, because if you point it out in a judgmental way, remember, the whole point of the passive-aggressive complex here is that you're not allowing yourself to feel these things. So if you point out to them, hey, this is really, really inconsistent, you're being a passive-aggressive asshole, what that's going to do is just reinforce the passive-aggressive cycle. Because you're showing it to them and shoving it in their face, hey, what you're actually doing to me is due to insecurity, but they don't want to feel insecure. They're not letting themselves feel insecure. So what you may actually see is an amplification of the defense mechanism and a worsening of the cycle. Okay? So when you tell them, you want to be very non-judgmental about it. And so I would just start by helping them understand, hey, so I'm a little bit confused. You said I should do whatever I want to, but you seem upset to me. Are you upset? Did you wish I did what I wanted to do, and I really appreciate that, you let me go out with my friends, or that not even let me, but I get to do what I want to. At the same time, I'm noticing that maybe you feel a little bit disappointed in my choice. Do you wish I had chosen differently? And you can use language like that, not that you were wrong, but your partner is allowed to be disappointed in your choices. And then this is also where you can sort of use language I'd love to, I enjoyed myself. I'm glad I went out. And at the same time, I'm noticing that you seem to be a little bit unhappy, which is fine. I understand that you respect my autonomy in the relationship, and it's because you respect my autonomy in the relationship that you didn't put any limitations. I really, really appreciate that. I love that about you. And also, I wish I had known that this would have upset you, because I appreciate my autonomy in the relationship, but I also care about your feelings. What can we do about that? Right? So there's a way that you can talk things through with them by being non-judgmental, kind of acknowledging what they're feeling, acknowledging what you're feeling, and just sort of ask them, how do we solve this? What do we do about this next time? What happens next time? And by the way, I use sample language, but oftentimes when I'm working with people, like clients or patients, it takes some time and some work to get to that spiel, right? How to acknowledge things and stuff like that, what to acknowledge for them. So this is key. So the first question is, do you need a relationship? Because then you have to resolve things with them. Now, hopefully, if you do need a relationship, they care about the relationship too, so they'll invest in having a conversation. They'll be able to tolerate having some of those negative feelings. Whereas if it's a coworker who doesn't like you, I don't know that they're going to invest that time in sort of fixing things. Okay? So the other thing that you can do is appeal to a third party. Now, this is sort of the least interventional kind of thing, because we're not directly dealing with the person, because oftentimes what happens if you are frustrated with a passive aggressive dynamic, chances are that the other person is more skilled at espionage and subtle warfare. Their special ops divisions are better than your special ops divisions, which is why you're kind of frustrated with it in the first place, because oftentimes people who are winning passive aggressive conflicts don't complain about them. So I'm assuming for a moment that their special ops is better than your special ops. Okay? But don't worry, we'll teach you how to level up your special ops by the end. Don't give up. So if it's a work-related scenario, consider talking to a boss or coworkers. And what you want to do is, approach things in kind of a, like, I'm trying to figure out how to work with this person way. Don't call them out and don't attack them and say, hey, like, this person is being a passive-aggressive dick to me. Can you get them to stop? What you want to do is sort of like, hey, I'm noticing that I'm having some friction with this person. Have you ever seen that before? Has this been a problem for you? Is it a me thing, or is it like, do other people struggle with this? Okay, so you want to sort of frame things, once again, non-judgmentally. You want to frame things, don't attack them. So you also want to frame things towards, like, especially if you're talking with your boss, like goals of the company. So if we're taking an example of, let's say that you did well in sales this month, and this person is not delivering messages that your clients are leaving at the office. And so what you want to sort of say is like, hey, I'm running into something weird. Kind of acknowledge your own bias or shortcoming when you ask. This is really, really important. So you want to say like, hey, I'm not sure if this is like just me making a mistake or what, but I'm getting like messages from several clients that some messages are not getting through. So when I'll talk to them, they'll leave messages at the office and they're kind of like not getting through. And after talking to my clients, it seems like maybe this person is the one taking the messages. It may just be a coincidence. Maybe they are passing them along and I'm not registering them. I'm not really sure. So I don't know if this is a me thing, but I'm curious, coworker, have you ever had any kind of weird problems with this person, or is this just on me? And in the case of your boss, you can even ask them, like, have you encountered any other stuff with this person? And then you can sort of ask your boss for help, and you can sort of say like, non-judgmentally, like, my goal is sales. Do you have any recommendations on how I should navigate this situation? So you can ask for help instead of blame. Now, there are a couple of important caveats here. The first is there are two kinds of bosses. Bosses who care and bosses who don't care, to be blunt. And it's not quite that binary, but sometimes it is. So y'all will kind of know, sometimes you'll be in a work situation where your boss is just mentally checked out, does not really care about having people get along. They're interested in certain outcomes or results, and they're like, let the underlings figure things out amongst themselves. Like, I'm not going to get into that crap. Y'all sort it out yourself. So if you have an apathetic boss, I would not go to the boss in this way. But if you do have a boss who seems to care about dynamics in the workplace and like seems to be like kind of a nice person, because those do exist and they're not as rare as people think they are, you can go to them and sort of have this conversation. You can also approach coworkers. But this is where you'll kind of discover that oftentimes people who are passive aggressive, remember, this is just the way that they're conditioned. So chances are it's not just you. So like people who behave in passive aggressive manners will do that with other people as well. Now, sometimes those people are very, very sneaky, and the boss won't know how passive aggressive they are, but coworkers will. So if there's like a power dynamic, oftentimes the power level, like the tier above you, will not be aware of the BS that this person is doing. So boss may say, no, I've never had that problem. You can say, okay, thank you for letting me know. Then I'll kind of work on it myself. Okay? So you can kind of appeal to a third party and just kind of let them know, ask for help. And the key thing here is that even if nothing explicit happens, the power dynamic of the situation has changed. Now you have allies, right? Because if there are other people at work who feel frustrated by this, then like y'all are going to sort of like, form an alliance of sorts. Y'all will have kind of a little bit of a, y'all will know something. You can maybe recruit other people, and then you can sort of you've got kind of like a team. So now it's not like you against this person. You guys can kind of like, y'all can outnumber them in a sense. Because a lot of times passive aggressive people will thrive off of, since they're not doing something direct, it's like hard to put together a pattern of their behavior. Okay? So another thing that you can do, go aggressive. So this is where you got to do a little bit more kind of diagnosis, okay? Or reconnaissance, maybe is a better way to put it. Some people are passive aggressive because they are conflict avoidant. So maybe they're like, these subtle masterminds of manipulation and stuff like that. But I would say like 50% of the time or more, the reason that people are passive aggressive is because there's all this crap that they're burying, right? And they can't address it directly. Like, it's psychologically uncomfortable for them to state their insecurities to someone else at work or state their issues. Oftentimes people are very conflict avoidant. And if you kind of think about it, like, a lot of people out there are conflict avoidant. And so how do you win in a contest with them? You engage in conflict. So they're conflict avoidant. You show them that you're willing to throw down. And if you kind of do that right, then chances are, like, there's a decent chance they'll just like back off, because then you'll terrify them. Now, is this nice? Not necessarily. Is it a little bit Machiavellian? Possibly. But this is the kind of thing where, like, this is the reality in some workplace. I'm not saying that you should attack them. I'm not saying that you should do anything that's harmful to them, but address the conflict. Like, you can call them out or have a conversation with them and just sort of like bring it to the surface, because the way that these people thrive is that they don't have any standing army, but they've got a good special ops team. So instead, what you want to do is change the dynamic of the conversation and actually like bring a conflict to the surface, right? So this is where even in something like, like a team meeting, what you can do is just call out your experience or call out the situation. So you can kind of point out to them, hey, so I've gotten messages from 4 clients that they left messages for me and they're not, I just wanted to let everyone know, a couple of clients of mine have, left messages that I didn't receive. I'm curious if anyone else is having this experience. And this is where if you formed allies and they're doing the same thing to other people in the office, someone else kind of mentions, oh yeah, like, that's happening to me too. And so that's where, like, in the team meeting, you kind of mention, you're like, oh, like, so I'm kind of curious, does anyone know, like, what's going on here? Because I think we really need to get these messages. And then this is where, like, what'll happen is, like, maybe the person will turn red and they'll, nothing will happen, and that can be the kind of end of it. Depending on what research you've done and how much you've set yourself up, you can even kind of go for the throat. And you can say, well, I asked them, who they're leaving messages with, and 3 or 4 of them seem to think that it's this coworker. Have you gotten any messages? And then the person may say yes or no, or like they're going to be called out. Like, you're not necessarily attacking them. You're just giving them an opportunity to share their perspective. And then, like you're kind of just showing them like, hey, I'm not going to let this crap continue, right? I'll call you out on it. They may defend themselves in some way. We'll get to that in a second. But the main thing is that if they're conflict avoidant, you can sort of have a conflict that is on the surface as opposed to subsurface. You can call attention to their behavior, and sometimes they'll like back off if you do this kind of thing. So there are a couple of very, very important things here. One is that you do so with a calm mind. You do so with a neutral tone. You don't actually attack them. And we'll get to this in a second. So what you want to do is, like, if you feel emotionally upset by their behavior, you want to process that emotion outside of work. So you want to come in calm, cool, and collected. And why is that? It's because oftentimes this strategy, when done incorrectly, is exactly what they're looking for. So a lot of people who are passive aggressive will try to debate you into attacking them, and then they will mop the floor with you. So this is classic, like, parry into riposte critical hit, right? This is what they're going to do. So the tricky thing about going aggressive is that when people are passive aggressive, what happens is they frustrate you so much, they attack you so much, they pew-pew you from on top of their walls, impervious to attack, and then you get upset with them. You get upset with them, and then you attack. They claim ignorance. You've been parried. And then you come out of the situation with the power dynamic even worse. Because now they have exposed you as an idiot who has like all these issues in their head, but you're not actually doing anything like that. So you'll notice this especially with manipulative parents. What they do is they debate you into an attack, and then they play their trap card, which is the victim card. No, I didn't do anything. Why are you attacking me? And your attack is overt. And if your attack is overt and their attack is like covert, then it's like you're the bad guy, right? And then you are the bad guy. And then they've won. They debated you into attacking. And so this is what a lot of passive-aggressive people do. Their whole long-term strategy is to debate you into an overt attack, which then they will mop the floor with you with. So what do you do about this? This is where like this stuff becomes really, really important. Anything that you do with them needs to be with a calm mind, kind of factual. You don't want to directly attack them. This is where you can use a subtle technique of like making a statement instead of an accusation. Or you can ask a question. So you just want to be like, hey, so my clients are saying this, period. You're not saying that they're actually withholding messages or anything like that. You're not saying that. You're just saying, this is what my clients told me. And it seems to be a pattern, which is why I'm bringing it up. What do you have to say? Like, I'm curious. Like, is this my, when the first client said it, I was like, okay, clearly like this person, something must have just fallen through the cracks. Not a big deal. Second time the client sort of said it, I was like, maybe the client is making a mistake, but now I've had 3 or 4 different clients who've all kind of said this, and now I'm trying to figure out like what's going on. So you want to attack without attacking, right? Because then they can't play the victim card. The victim card, like what you're going to do is like get up into their personal space, but you're not going to auto attack them because they're not going to be able to riposte because you don't want them to parry. So what you really have to do this successfully is remove ego from the equation, remove emotions from the equation. You don't want to seek justice. If your goal is to seek justice, I think that's a losing strategy. You don't want to blame them. You just want to point it out to them non-judgmentally. And depending on how brutal you are, you can sort of like, you can kind of debate them into like more and more stuff if you want to. But you can even do stuff like, yeah, so I was kind of confused because they didn't know who they were leaving the messages with. Or they said they were leaving the messages with you and I didn't believe them. So what I asked my 4 clients to do is I gave them the extensions of all 4 salespeople in the office, and I asked them to call after hours and see whose voice they were talking to. And all 4 of them confirmed that they were leaving messages with you. And then you don't say anything else. Then you just stay silent. You don't accuse them. You just stay silent. And they're not going to be able to tolerate the silence. Like, it's going to be so painful. And you want to do it calm. Okay? Cool. Collected. And that's how you deal with passive-aggressive people. So to summarize, unfortunately, passive-aggressive people are very common. And the reason for this is because psychologically, the way that our mind works, it's sort of how our mind works. We have feelings that we're not comfortable with. And then we stuff them down into the subconscious mind, and then they kind of bleed to the surface in ways that we're not happy. And we sort of result in this passive-aggressive behavior because we would never attack anyone. Heaven forbid I would ever do anything like that. Sometimes people are conditioned to be passive-aggressive. That's just the households that they grew up in. That's just how they know how. That's the meta that they grew up in, so that's the meta that they know. Unfortunately, we see these kinds of these relationship dynamics a lot in workplaces, sometimes in complex family units. And, like part of the reason that people do this is because like it's a safe way to attack people. It's a way to lobby for power, lobby for position. Oftentimes we'll see these kinds of dynamics arise a lot when people are territorial or they feel threatened. Really, really common. So that you can use all of this information to kind of understand your situation, right? Why is this person doing this? Like, what could they be feeling? Like, how could I manage it? Now, the last thing, and this is what's really tricky, is sometimes when you think someone is being passive aggressive with you, that's actually coming from you. It's not coming from them. They're not actually doing anything, which is why it's passive aggression. They're not losing weight to make you feel bad. They're losing weight because they were overweight their whole life and they've decided they want to stop being overweight. Or they're underweight and they've decided they want to stop being skinny. They want to bulk up, right? Male, female, underweight, overweight, all those things don't really matter. They're not doing it to offend you. So this is the tricky thing, is that a lot of times your cognitive bias or your misperception will perceive other people as passive aggressive. How do you know? That's where it comes down to your own insecurities, especially in the workplace. And this is what I think is really valuable about when we do coaching, because in coaching, here's the thing, everyone will give you this. People will give you, you can Google, how do I deal with people who are passive aggressive? You'll get a bunch of strategies. I have literally never seen, if you think people are passive aggressive, you should check yourself before you wreck yourself. That could be a cognitive bias on your part. I've never read that externally. This is one of the key things that I think we do, which is why we get good outcomes, is we focus on the perceptual problems that people may have. Okay? Now, how to deal with it. The first question is, do you need a relationship with this person? Right? Is this someone like a partner? Is this someone that you want to, even in the case of a coworker? If so, try to talk to them in a non-judgmental way. If you talk to them in a non-judgmental way, what you may discover is, oh my goodness, this is actually what's going on. Or you may just discover that there's a miscommunication issue where you could be doing something better, they could be doing something better, but approach them non-judgmentally. Next thing you can do is appeal to a third party. Talk to coworkers, talk to your boss. Once again, you don't want to attack them, you don't want to blame them, right? Because that's going to activate their parry and counterattack you. So you don't want to do that. You want to align things towards goals of the company. So the reason I'm asking is because I want, this office to succeed, and these messages need to be getting through. It's not about ego. It's not about blame. It's not about emotions. It's like, this just needs to happen. Okay? So you don't want to activate their trap card. Well said, Super Dark Volid. So sometimes as you do this, if this really is the way they're conditioned, what you'll discover from your coworkers is that a lot of them will have the same experience. And then you've got allies. So sometimes what you want to do is just go aggressive. So raise the conflict to the surface. So instead of having a subsurface conflict, just have a conversation about it or acknowledge it in some public way. Remember, what we don't want to do is we don't want to get emotionally upset. We want to do it with a calm mind, neutral tone. So you can do it publicly if you want to, but it's not an attack. You're just going to, call out the behavior and explore it in a group of people if you want to. And then chances are, if they're conflict avoidant, they're going to they're going to get really upset, but they hopefully will stop messing with you. You can even afterward be kind to them. That's actually really important. So if they start giving you the messages again, you can say, hey, thank you so much for doing that. I really appreciate it. It's really helped me and my clients out a lot. I brought you a muffin as a way of saying thank you. I remember you said that you really like blueberry muffins, so here you go. Right? You can be kind. Now, the key thing to remember is that if you go aggressive, sometimes you are falling into their debating strategy. So the way that passive-aggressive people thrive is that they make you upset, you attack, they play their trap card, you're the bad guy. Right? And then at the end of it, the power dynamic has worsened. They have won. Round 1 KO. And now they have an advantage for round 2. There's a snowballing effect. So don't play their game. So approach with a calm mind, be factual. Don't really attack them. You can use things like silence, let go of your ego, let go of your emotions. Talk to your therapist about it, talk to your partner about it. Process your emotions on the HG Discord if you want to. Talk to your coach, whatever. And then go in and then be calm, cool, and collected. But that's what I got to say about passive aggressive. Okay? It's not by any means a perfect rundown. It is also not by any means a completely comprehensive rundown. But I would say that having worked with a lot of people who engage in passive aggressive behaviors and helping them no longer engage in passive aggressive behaviors, which there's a whole other segment that we could do on. But the point here is that this person is saying someone else is being passive aggressive with me. How do I understand it? How do I deal with it? And the good news is there are a lot of different ways that you can understand it. And there's also almost like a decision tree, right? Is my boss like, does my boss care or not care? Am I the only one who's experiencing it or not experiencing it? Is this someone that I need a relationship with or I don't need a relationship with? And depending on all those different things, you can arrive at sort of a precise solution that hopefully will work for you. The one thing that's really, really important is that you be aware of your own cognitive biases. You process your own emotions. You let ego out of the equation so that when you square up against them in some way, whether it's a conversation, and I don't know if you'll notice this, whether you're talking to your wife or your husband or someone, your nemesis at work, non-judgmentalness is at the top of the list. Being free of your ego is at the top of the list. Being calm, cool, and collected is at the top of the list, no matter what you do, right? So it's not just about owning someone else. But at times, you have to, call people out on their behavior. And then give them like an avenue for escape, right? That's really important from Sun Tzu. So that's where that's why you say like, hey, this is happening. Don't attack, but just say, hey, this is happening, period. And then when you do that, people will be like, you have to give them a chance to make excuses. And then what you can decide at that point is if you give them a chance to make an excuse and say, okay, cool. So like, it's totally fine. I understand that you had a lot going on. So I'm guessing that this won't continue to happen. Right? And they'll say, yeah, it won't happen again. You're like, fantastic. And then you've established dominance. Thank you so much. Then you take that muffin for yourself. That's all ego. Right? This isn't about putting people in their place, even though you can want to do that. It's really about trying to deal with someone. So remember that if someone is behaving in a passive-aggressive manner with you, like have some compassion. They're not doing it because they're intrinsically an ass, right? They're like doing it because they have feelings. They were conditioned a particular way. And even if they are being an ass, you can be a little bit forgiving. Doesn't mean you have to tolerate their behavior. You can put their behavior in check. But you don't have to harbor any malice, ill will, or sense of vengeance. Ideally, at work, you were meant to be on the same team, right? Yeah, ideally. But oftentimes, remember that even though you're on the same team, sometimes you're competing against your colleagues for things like promotions. And that's okay. So I think it's really cool. So I've had, many situations in my life where I'm competing against my colleagues, and that can be like really fine. So like there has to be no ill will, and that's where like practicing detachment and stuff. So I remember there was a pretty prestigious position which I applied to in residency, and I didn't end up getting it, which turned out to be great because instead I started Healthy Gamer, started the work that would eventually become Healthy Gamer, I should say. Whereas if I had gotten that position, I probably wouldn't be here today, because that would have launched me on this track of academic success. So that's the kind of thing where it's like, I applied for it. I was like, hey, if I get this position, this is what I would do with it. This is what I want to do with it. And someone else got the position. That's great. They did a fantastic job. I went on and did something else. So that's where like you can even compete against your colleagues without any ill will and recognize that it's okay for one of y'all to win and one of y'all to lose. Maybe the reason that they won and you lost is because they're actually better suited for the position. And I think they were better suited for the position. In retrospect, I would have hated doing it. Right? So that's okay. Someone saying, I think you made the better choice. It wasn't my choice to make. But I was explicit with people. I was like, hey, if you pick me, this is what I'm going to do. If this is not your top priority, you guys have other priorities, like you should pick someone else. Yeah, so a lot of people, I would have hated it. No, seriously, I would have hated it. Maybe it's copium, but I'm pretty sure it's not. It's doing stuff like making call schedules, okay? Which I hate that stuff. And now the more details I provide, the more defensive I become, the deeper the inhalation of copium. The best copium is true. Very true. Very true. Right? So that's actually true. So now I'm going to have to reflect a little bit about whether I'm just saying that to myself. Okay. We're past time, but I think we should meditate for a little bit. Are y'all okay with that? Okay. Let me think. Okay. So we're going to do something. Let me think about how to structure this meditation. So we're going to do a letting go of anger meditation, for lack of a better term. Maybe actually, no. This is a letting go of triumph meditation. Okay? So this is going to be kind of weird, but I'll explain to y'all how this works. So this meditation, first of all, is somewhat adaptable. But a lot of when we get into trouble, what we're chasing is triumph, right? So if we look at like this passive aggressive kind of stuff, like what you want to do is put them in their place, right? Like even if you think about toxicity in video games, when you tell someone to 1v1 me mid, what you're looking for is triumph. You're looking to win. The problem is that oftentimes in seeking triumph is when we actually cause ourselves the biggest problems, right? When you attack someone else because you want to put them in their place is when you end up they activate their trap card and you're the one who actually ends up looking like the asshole. Sometimes you'll tell people to 1v1 mid you and they will absolutely destroy you, right? Because they are better and you're frustrated, you're toxic, you're frustrated by losing the game, and then like you want to put them in their place, but maybe the reason you're losing the game is because they're better than you are. And so oftentimes I think we talk a lot about letting go of negative emotions, but in my experience, the desire for triumph gets us into a lot of trouble, right? I want to be number one. It's all ego. So what we're going to do in this meditation, it's going to have basically two parts. The first part is going to be a visualization of sorts. So I'll walk y'all through evoking something that makes you feel triumphant, and then we're going to let go of that triumph. We're going to sort of almost grieve it, like let it go, detach from it, and just let it go so that we're not controlled by that desire anymore. Now, in the letting go part, this is where things get a little bit personalized. So for a lot of these meditations, there's an evoking of something, and then there's a transcendence of that thing. And in that transcendence phase, this is where your particular temperament or cognitive style comes in. So when I teach meditation, oftentimes what I'll do is I'll work with an individual. And so I'll figure out, okay, this person likes sight-oriented meditations. This person likes visualizations. This person likes breath. This person likes sound. Or there'll be some kind of anchor. This person likes mantra. They like chanting. So we're not going to know exactly what that is. So we're going to use breath, and then we're also going to do a mantra. But this is where for that second phase, you can kind of adapt the meditation to whichever technique you like. So if you like breathing, you can do that. If you like chanting a mantra, you can chant your mantra in that kind of moment. But in that transcendent technique, as we let go, we're going to use whatever practice centers us very easily. Okay? So I'll give you all just like 3 examples. So one will be a breathing practice that will be focused on the navel. So we're kind of breathe in, feel that triumph, that feeling of triumph down there, and let go of the triumph through our exhalation. The next thing that we're going to do is focus on the third eye. So for those of y'all that like third eye practices, and instead what we're going to do when we do this third eye practice is that we're going to see the nature of triumph. We're going to see our ego involved in this, and we're going to just like mentally let it go. It's not breathing it out. It's not emotional. It's going to be insight oriented. We're going to understand the origin of triumph. And then the third thing that we're going to do is chant a mantra. So I'll share Om with you, but if y'all, any of the Mahavakyas or other general mantras will work for this kind of thing. So you can use, but we're just going to do Om, right? So in your mind, you're going to chant Om, or you can chant it aloud, and you'll kind of let that triumph go. Okay? So let's begin. So sit up straight. Close your eyes. Okay. I'm kind of confused why everyone is commenting on my appearance today, but I appreciate the compliments. Damn it. Okay. So sit up straight, close your eyes. We're going to start by taking a moment to center ourselves. So when we center ourselves, we can focus on our breath. I like to lean into my proprioception, which is our sense of our position in space. So if I raise my arm, I can tell my arm is up here. If I lower my arm, I can tell my arm is down here. So even with your eyes closed, you can feel your body. You can feel where you are in space. So I'm going to tune into that. You can feel your weight kind of going into the ground. Let your shoulders relax. Let your breathing slow. Take a moment to work out any kinks that your body may have, because we'll be still for the next part. And now what I want you to do is think about someone that pisses you off. Think about a person or a situation or a resentment, somewhere that you've been wronged, where there was injustice in the world. Something that makes you want to make a fist and shake it. And pick one thing. Something that really frustrates you. And notice the patterns of the memory or the situation. Appreciate the aspects of it. You may even notice that it's kind of hard to evoke the toxicity that you used to feel, which is noteworthy. But do your best. And now what I want you to do is imagine a scenario in which you will feel triumph in that situation. So you'll give them a piece of your mind, or you will 1v1 them in mid. You dumpster them, you put them in their place. Maybe they're getting into shape to make you look bad, and you'll show them you're going to get into more shape. You're going to get into the best shape, and then they'll see, then they'll learn. So let those feelings come forth as well. The sensation of triumph, of justice. Visualize what it would look like, your moment of victory, if it was memorialized in a painting. And now what we're going to do is take those feelings, the feelings of resentment, the feelings of anger, as well as the feelings of triumph and righteousness. And we're going to imagine that they're in our belly, like a knot of different feelings all tied together, kind of red and black in color, almost like a tangled ball of yarn that is red and black. Because there is something ugly about that victory. We're going to start by breathing into it. And then breathe out. And as you experience those emotions, as you continue breathing, let each one of them go. So in the first scenario, go through it again, but pause this time when you feel an emotion and breathe into it and let that emotion go. And then the next thing happened in your story, in that traumatic event, and breathe into it and let that resentment go. And in that way, as you breathe, go through your resentful scenario, letting each negative emotion go one at a time. We'll continue for about 30 seconds or so. And now what we're going to do is think about the triumphant scenario. So imagine that you've let all of those red feelings out. So all that remains now is a tangled ball of black. And go through the fantasy of your triumph. And as you imagine your victory over the undeserving, notice that tarry blackness inside you. And with each of those emotions as well, as you go through orchestrate your victory, pause and breathe out that triumph. Let it go. Go through each emotion, breathing into your stomach and letting it go. Let go of your victory. And now what we'll do is, if you've had experience with any kind of Agna Chakra or third eye practices, like charging the laser beam or other kinds of things through Dr. K's guide, we're going to focus on the point of our third eye. And we're going to drive our attention to it. It's the space between our eyebrows, right about right here. And now we're going to just notice, while concentrating on that point, what the nature of these feelings are. So you don't have to actively go through the mental scenarios. We want to focus on that third eye center and just let your mind digest. Actually don't need to be thinking much at all. Notice the nature of these things. See your attachment. See the anger and resentment that you feel, which is born of entitlement, of what you deserve. And that the concept of deserving comes from the ego. And look for ego in the triumph as well. See how triumph is nothing but ego. And now notice how in this space of calm observation, these feelings mean almost nothing to you. That as you center yourself in who you truly are, in this vastness of experience, in this observing self, how the ego matters less. And let yourself let it go. Let yourself let go of the anger, of the resentment, of the triumph, of the need for justice. Realize that this whole process has already deprived you of peace. And that engaging in it further will only deprive you of more peace. So let it go. And now you can either out loud or silently in your head repeat the mantra Om or a mantra of your choice. I'm sort of feeling Om Namaha Shivaya is the appropriate thing in this moment. Om Namaha Shivaya. Om Namaha Shivaya. Om Namaha Shivaya. And use the mantra to seal this meditation experience. All of the peace that you've felt, all of the learning that you have, all of the grounding that you've attained, use the mantra to seal it and plant it within you. And you've let go of it now. You need no justice. Your ego has been let go. And sit with the peace within you. And now with a deep breath in and out, start to return to the world. Once again, tap into the proprioceptive sense, the space, the feeling of your body in space. And as you return to your body, notice all the wiggling that you need to do. Maybe your legs have fallen asleep. Maybe you're feeling thirsty. Notice all the sensations which are returning to you now. As you breathe in and exhale, prepare yourself to fully come back. Put your palms together in front of you in Namaste position. Give gratitude to yourself and to the universe for allowing you to let go of this problem, to let go of your triumph and your anger, and to see that there are two sides of the same coin. And by chasing one, we give power to the other. That resentment fuels the triumph. And chasing the triumph fuels the resentment. And with one final inhalation, as you exhale, bow your head and slowly open your eyes. So a couple of things. The first is, sometimes this happens. So I tend to steer clear of the mantras and the spiritual practices that have more of a religious background. But even then, I kind of dispute that characterization, because I think a lot of what we understand as religion, even the term religion, is actually like a Western and almost Judeo-Christian concept. So I sort of reject the premise that some of what I teach is religious in nature, although from an academic sense, you can absolutely make that argument. I just think that that's a mistake on the part of historical academia. So today I offered Om Namah Shivaya, which is absolutely on the religious end of what we teach. So I don't think it involves believing in anything. So let me explain a little bit. So Shiva is viewed as the god of destruction, but that's not really what Shiva is. Like, if you actually ask scholars of this tradition, of the yogic tradition, Shiva is simply the word for consciousness. And sometimes what happens is these concepts get embodied within a god, but that's not really what Shiva means. Like, the actual Sanskrit term of Shiva means consciousness. And so what you're sort of tapping into is like that sense of consciousness, which is free of form and substance and desire and all that kind of stuff. So if it bothers you that that's religious in background, by all means, discard it. And at the same time, that's just what felt authentic in the moment. So I went with it. It wasn't where I was planning on going. But that's what happens. And so, as Chinese cabbage farmer is saying, Shiva represents a certain level of consciousness. Well said. And so what we're shooting for is that. As we transcend ego, we move one step closer to consciousness. And by invoking Shiva, what we aim to do is like move one step closer to transcendent consciousness. And Top Key 007 was saying, very new experience. Thank you so much. You're very welcome. Welcome to the stream. And someone else was saying, I don't want to, so Pepegas was saying, I don't want to let it go. I captured the part of me that wants to hold me back. I locked it and now I have control over it. I can't let it go. If I do, all I've been working now for till now will be for nothing. So this is where I'd say, if you don't want to let it go and you're not ready to let it go, then don't let it go. So holding on to our resentment and our triumph is sometimes what we need. So there's like, if I have a 5-year-old kid who loves their blankie, do they need the blankie? No. Does the blankie do a whole lot for them? Not really. It's purely emotional. It's purely an attachment, right? They don't need the blankie. If they lost the blankie, they'd be fine. 20 years later, they're going to be okay. So oftentimes, and at the same time, if we yank the blanket away from them, we tell them, you don't need this. This is for kids. That in and of itself is going to be traumatic. And yet, how many of you, presumably adults, have blankies? Right? We let things go when we're ready to. So if you're not ready, then hang on to it. If you're not ready to let it go, don't let it go. Then lean into the Ajna Chakra part and try to understand it, right? What is this? Why am I not ready to let it go? Can you at least see that the resentment and the triumph go hand in hand? You can't have one without the other. If you're afraid because you've built up an adaptation that involves control instead of surrender, that's fine. Run with it. And just be aware that at one point, the strategy that you've developed may not work so great anymore. And if you ever discover that that's the case, then come back to this practice. And it'll be here waiting for you. And you may discover that you never get there. You may discover that there is not right, that you should never get there. That's terrible. That the presumptions that I'm making are 100% wrong. And even if you get there, that's a wonderful place to be. As long as you're sure in it, that's fine. Who said I was the arbiter of truth? So if you're not ready to let it go, hang on to it. Just accept and notice that you're not ready to let it go. Right? That's enough for today. So alpha inhibitor 98 is doing different types of meditation okay, or should you stick to one type? Both. So I think you should try lots of different kinds of meditation until you find one that resonates with you, feels easy, and or lets you like enter a meditative state pretty easily. Then you should practice that one. Right? So once you find something, it's like, should I eat the same food every day or should I eat different foods every day? And it's like, well, it's a combination of both, right? You try a lot of things until you figure out what you like. And then you can start you get groceries to make your weekly or monthly regimen. You make chili once a month. You do salad once a week. Like you figure out what your rotation is and then you craft your meditation practice that way. Right? And the whole point, the challenge is that what a lot of people, this is the reason we teach meditation the way that we do, is that a lot of people are taught. So a lot of teachers of meditation are experts in one tradition. So if you think about who teaches meditation, usually monks and stuff, right? Or you'll have some trained teacher at a meditation center. And usually what happens is you have to get certified nowadays to teach meditation. I'm a level 3 meditation instructor. And so what they've done is they've advanced very high in this one tradition. But if we look at it historically, there are thousands of traditions of meditation, if not more. And so why? Why are there so many different traditions of meditation? Because there are lots of different kinds of minds. And the reason that so many different kinds of meditation have flourished is because different minds require different techniques, just like there's lots of different foods. The challenge is that as a society, we've started to believe in experts. Oh, this person is an expert. And even the person teaching you is I'm the expert. I know, because I've done level 3. I've done level 3 training. You do not realize how knowledgeable I am. I'm level 3 meditation instructor. But they've only been taught usually one tradition. So what they teach you is their tradition. And then what happens is people say meditation isn't for me, or they think they're bad at it. And then the meditation teacher tells them consistency is important, practice is important, you'll get it eventually. Everyone struggles with this. It's a normal part of the meditative process. You'll hear about persistence and dedication, which is sort of true. But maybe the reason that people struggle with it, and maybe the reason that it happens to everyone, is because you're a bad teacher or your technique is bad. Did you ever consider that? Did you ever consider that if your student is having a problem, if the student is struggling, that's a fault of the teacher, not a fault of the student? But this has been completely lost in meditation instruction. This is the way to meditate. You can go to wherever you want to. They'll teach you their technique. They'll charge you $0, $100, $1,000, $10,000 to meditate the best way. And if it's not working for you, try harder. Right? So it's been my experience. So part of the reason that I didn't become a monk was because I couldn't find, I found one place where I tried and they said no, or they said later. But as a consequence of that, I went and I explored lots of different kinds of meditation techniques. I went to different ashrams in India, South Korea, Japan. and studied a lot of different meditation. What I sort of came to the conclusion of was, oh, like there's like different kinds of temperaments, different kinds of cognitive fingerprints. No two minds are exactly alike. Therefore, the technique of meditation for no two minds will be exactly the same. And so experiment until you find what works for you, right? Just like you find what food you like, that happens through experimentation. And meditation should be the same way. Meditation tier list. So we already have something like a tier list. I don't know about tiers because that implies that one is better than the other. But we do have, if y'all are interested, if you check out Dr. K's Guide to Meditation, there's a segment on like history of meditation and different kinds of meditation. So we break apart like how, when I'm working with someone, there's a set of different things like rules that I'll use in terms of recommending a meditation. So for example, is this someone who likes to focus their mind? Or is this someone who needs curiosity in order to get their mind to focus? So this is where, there are two different techniques. In one technique, I will give someone a particular mantra to chant, and that works really well for them. In another technique, I'll ask someone, decipher the sound of the ocean, or decipher the sound of your breath. Spell it out for me. What is the sound that your breath makes? And what gets them to sit every day and focus on it for 20 minutes is if they're trying to figure something out. That's what they need to get their mind to sit still. So that's where really, if you want to like learn meditation, like have a customized technique. Yeah, so Platt Candid is saying the Kayasthira meditation was absolutely amazing, even just to experience once and not practice regularly. But I found it works great for me personally. Yeah, that's because, so that's where like, I love that technique. And it's one of the techniques that has truly taught me. And I think for those of you people that it worked for you, you understand now what meditation truly is. Because if you think about that technique, what you're doing is sit still and be aware. That's what the technique is. But it's so much more than that, right? That technique teaches you the nature of life and joy and relief and suffering. And for people who weren't there, like, you're not going to, like, sorry, right? But hopefully y'all will teach it somehow more consistently. But it's not for everyone. Not everyone has that experience. But for some people, it awakens them. Holy crap, this is what it means to be alive. And that's the goal of meditation. But it's not going to work for everyone, right? Different things work for different people. And that's okay. But I'm glad it worked for you. Is that the sit still one? Absolutely. And some people may be like, what? That didn't happen for me. Can I brute force a certain meditation type? For example, I learned I like the benefits from the third eye meditation, but it doesn't feel that easy for me to do. 100%. So you may be someone that the best meditation technique for you is one that isn't easy to do. It's like, I'm going to meditate. And you're going to do that for a while. And you're like, I'm going to meditate because this is the best one. Like, this is the one that levels me up the most. And you'll do that for a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. Then you'll wake up on year 11. And you'll be like, that was silly. I never needed to do that. But you can't understand that until you brute force it. Would you say that the effects of LSD is synonymous to reaching the height during meditation? Absolutely not. We've talked about that at length, but absolutely not. We recently did a stream about meditating and getting high and what's the relationship between the two. But yeah. Okay, we got to go because we're 75 minutes over time. Can you give us another Shunya meditation? I can, but advanced Shunya practices I'm not sure are appropriate to stream. Because Shunya practices are a little bit more, I shouldn't say dangerous, but the percentage of people who will understand, appreciate, and be able to engage in a higher level Shunya practice is quite small. It's not a practice. Advanced Shunya practices are not for noobs. Okay. So Omak Table, first time chatter, is trying to be funny, is saying, "Can I get my ego back?" That's your ego tricking you, because if there's a "can I," that I is your ego. You never lost it in the first place. It just tricked you into thinking it was gone. Who are we rating, by the way? Is meditation dangerous? Generally speaking, no, but there have been adverse medical effects from meditation. Okay, we can raid Lily. Who's the I, right? It's a beautiful question. Can I get my ego back? Who's the I and what's my? All right, we'll raid Lily. Okay, we'll see y'all in... Today's Friday, so have a good weekend. We'll see y'all on Monday. Take care.